But I would like the minutes to reflect that it was a vote of us, the 7 of us, to direct John so that John's not in the crosshairs on that conversation. If I move that we thank John for this modified proposal, but that we stick to the original condition of occupation, namely remove the set.
Second.
When it's not in use.
When it's not in use.
Any further discussion?
Just one question. Are we going to define what not in use is? Because to me, it's after a day it should be taken down, and I think that's pretty reasonable.
For performance space.
Right, because the conversation, I'm just saying, because the conversation I've had with him is, he thinks use is, I did it this Sunday, I did it next Sunday, so I don't have to take it down in between. And I just wanted to clarify that.
It's kind of like both photos.
Right? So I just, because that's what he's going to come back with, because he's already done that. So I just want to point out that we think that, I want to point out that we think use, taking it down right away means taking it down within 24 hours after the performance. So not that night, but the next day.
Is the issue that they can't take it down? What I recall, there's some aspect of this that involved
Labor. It's just labor.
It's big and awkward.
And
Anything further, Michael?
No.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the president responding thus? And Michael?
Aye.
Okay. I'll draft the letter. That actually leads me to my next note, and I want to, I need to note that about 8 months ago, I think, Dick Brockway made an excellent suggestion, which I have not dutifully followed up on. And Dick suggested that it would be a good idea to keep an informal tally of the votes or understandings that came out of our meetings that could be circulated to the overseers, and of course a copy in the office, just so that meeting to meeting we have an understanding of, relatively quickly, within a few days, of what was agreed to. Sometimes we're in a situation, because of the way we meet and the nature of our minutes, that there's a confusion or misunderstanding about when an agreement was made, which often occurred 6 months or 12 months prior, or even a month prior. And I think it would be helpful if I just kept track of the major decisions that are made in a meeting. Not everything. The 3 to 6 items that come out of a meeting. I'll circulate it back. I promise no more than 1 page of bullet points to the overseers immediately following each meeting, so that moving forward we have some record. That can be part of, that can be eventually amended to the minutes also. The copy will be kept in the office, but I think that it may help us remain clear about what we've agreed to as we move forward. And with the suggestion that Dick had made, and I agreed it was a good suggestion, I just haven't followed him. So Dick, I'm going to, starting now, try and stay true to that. And my final note is that there are a number of large, significant tasks in front of this board moving forward. And the complexity and interdependency of these tasks, including the seawall and replacing the chlorination-dechlorination process, and a building that has to be built, and other issues. Excuse me.
I have a question about the last thing.
Okay.
When you're done.
Etc.
Okay.
I think impels us to just take a breather and make sure that we all understand how the committees operate and what their responsibilities are and how we relate to one another in terms of procedure and process as you move through this very complicated period. And I have a suggestion, which is that in the month of May, because I don't think there's any way we're going to make it happen in April, that in the month of May we schedule a workshop amongst the overseers, which which would be public, although at workshops, the public is not allowed to speak, the public can observe, but the public can attend. A workshop among the overseers, probably a workshop that is facilitated perhaps by an outside party, to help us better understand and make sure we all agree about procedures and process amongst ourselves. This workshop could occur the Saturday before our Sunday meeting in May. It could occur that afternoon of the Sunday meeting in May. And I don't think this is an eternal operation. I think it could perhaps be an hour or two. But I think it would be helpful, especially as we enter the summer season, when there's going to be a great intensity of public meetings, etc., that we have a clear understanding of procedure and how we're moving forward. So it's a suggestion I have. Obviously, the overseers would have to agree to it. I can only put it forth as an idea, and the overseers have to agree to do it. We'd have to figure out the details of it. But right now, I'm offering it as a notion.
So Michael Terrell, did you hear all that? Michael Terrell.
I did, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, just want to check.
Now,
And you're suggesting this because you see complications and because of the public forums that we're going to have, and you want us to be clear on where we are as a group with these issues before this starts, or you want us to be clear on the procedures?
I think it's the latter.
it's the latter. I'm not concerned about content, about where we stand individually or as a board in terms of process,
Okay.
of issues. I'm concerned about the fact that we're entering the summer season with a series of, frankly, interdependent projects that are going on, that infrastructure projects and waterfront safety projects and safety committee projects and a lot of other things are blending together, understandably, and we want to make sure that we understand the lines among them and what our positions can be and should be as individual advocates for particular positions. And so I want to make sure that everyone on this board understands what is and isn't kosher in terms of how they respond to board chairs and how they respond to each other and how we all work together as a group. Because we're moving into a complicated phase right now that's going to endure for a while, but especially through the summer season. It's now only March. Things are only going to get more complicated with more attendees at these meetings as we move through the next few months. And I think it's now a good time to just take a little space, make sure we all understand what the rules are as we move forward. And there are also new people to this board who, while they are spectacular in terms of what they've offered thus far, haven't heard all the rules explicated as it were. There are bylaws that are written, but I think it's good to have these things spelled out. And I think, as I said, it may be good to have an outside facilitator involved in this process. Maybe.
Do you have somebody in mind as an outside?
I have a thought or two, but I'll deal with that in a later.
I'm getting overtones of what's going on in Belfast, which is just this is totally different. We're not there,
We're
right?
nowhere near.
Okay.
Well, if so, then I would be in a really bad place, right? And you are all, feel free to kick me out. That's fine.
You're not getting out that easy.
I still move. Can I do that? Okay. I still move. I think it's a good idea.
Second by Judy. Discussion.
I think it's a terrific idea, and I think Memorial Day weekend is the most practical time that we can do that, which is what we've just laid out.
Being that everybody is here then?
We're here then, April already is tight. The other option might be the weekend before that.
Well, and I would just beg an indulgence. My son graduates from high school this
That's
Saturday,
kind of-
Memorial Day weekend.
So
How about
Considering how
the
much money
overseers
I
meeting is
spent.
on the 12th, how about the 11th of May then? How about the Saturday before the overseers meeting?
Lee?
I think we better have it the same day, because otherwise you're going to require some people to make 2 trips here rather than 1.
I'm happy to have it starting at 12 noon on the day of the overseers meeting.
Could we,
Or 1 o'clock. Mike?
Is it possible to flip them that day? Maybe do this first and then have, or is that not a good idea?
It's possible. I don't know how the public would feel about that. Starting in May is when we tend to start getting more attendance at meetings.
Right.
And so I don't know if people care about that or not. Vicki?
What would the date be in May?
I think that makes a tremendously long day. I don't think as human beings that that's such a good idea. If people are coming up for the overseers meeting, it is the 1st of May, I would rather see an idea of who may or may not be able to make a Saturday meeting before our Sunday meeting, our Sunday overseers meeting, before we try to combine them all in a long day on Sunday, which is.
I think the overseers meet on the 12th
Right.
of May. So
Right.
the
Yeah,
Saturday
Saturday, the
before
11th.
would be the 11th.
Right. I
Does
have,
anybody have a problem? I mean,
I have a bench trial, that's a 2-day trial, starting on 14th, so that weekend's gonna be held for me in any event. So I would be here for this. I think it's an important suggestion that John has
I mean,
put out.
the other option is to go, the week before that, the 4th of May.
That would be better for me.
I mean, that's 2 weeks, or you're
I
not.
think if we're gonna have people making 2 trips
The
anyways,
fourth, these have to
potentially,
be,
then
we can make it.
the week before would be good.
And then could you be able to make 2 weekends in a row to come up? Okay, Mike Terrell, go ahead, what were you saying? I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to understand the fourth, if that works better for me. I've got some moving parts.
So
Thinking
you,
about the fourth or the,
Right,
Um,
he's just looking at his
I'll tell you what, I recommend that if there is agreement, tentative agreement to this notion, I'll put out a doodle poll with a variety of options, and people can respond to that, because it seems like, yes, Jeff?
Not to be contrary, but can we just do it now?
Right.
Because there are only 7 of us.
Well,
And that way,
I'm trying to respect what Mike, it sounds like Michael's not certain yet of his situation.
oh,
well, my instinct is that, and this is just, obviously, it's just one person, but my instinct is better. I'm better later in May or early June than I am early May.
Lee?
I'm gonna have difficulty in having 2 days since I've already lost my full-time hired man who's leaving on the 13th of April, which means I'll be down to just the fellow that milks. And if you have it 2 days in a row, or I'm just not gonna be able to make it, that's all.
And I hate to complicate it even more, but we don't have an April date right now, do we?
Let's
Yeah.
deal with this May issue.
No, I'm just, if we were to consider the 27th of April, because this is the 25th already, so it's really a month from now, is that too soon for this other thing too, is my question. So that those two could be together for Lee's, all I was getting.
I mean, my point is, I don't care how long the meeting is. I mean, I put in long hours where I work now, and I have no, if you can't put in the hours, then don't be on the board.
well, with that said, I mean, could we do an overseers meeting, break for lunch, and then reconvene
Yeah.
to do
Yeah.
your, the work session?
I think that's feasible. I
would
do.
agree with that.
Logistically, it's
With a-
probably
with a-
easier. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
What date would that be?
Well, that's what we're talking
Well, that's what we're talking about. So, as a suggestion is we would do the April overseers meeting on the 27th. Break, no, the
No,
21st.
Easter's the 21st.
Yeah, 20, not the Saturday, obviously.
Yeah, so have the overseers meeting the morning of April 27th, break for lunch, and then reconvene as a group in the afternoon to do the work session.
Yeah, that sounds good.
April 27th is a Saturday.
No, it's Sunday.
Oh,
I
I meant the 28th, the 28th.
So,
Judy?
can I suggest that may be a brilliant idea? That if we change if we change the April meeting from the 14th, then I won't miss the April meeting. I could come on the 28th. I hadn't asked you to change the April one because I was thinking, why would we do it on Easter? But the 28th would be great for me. I have a trial ending on the 26th, so I'll be tired, but all engaged, and
I'll bring
I
you some
don't have to worry about the trial for that May 12th date. So I guess sooner also, rather than later also works. In terms of what the goal of this workshop is to assure that we know our roles and do them as well as we can.
And it also pushing it to the end of April gives John more time to make sure, because if we were talking about that first weekend of May, it's really only 1 week earlier now to do that April one.
Vicki?
I'm getting the sense that this has all been discussed before, and this is the first time I'm hearing this, but you're talking about moving the April meeting from the 14th to the 28th, and then we're going to have our next meeting on May 12th after that, so that'll be 2 weeks after that, correct? That's what we're talking about here for meetings, because for whatever reason, we're moving the April meeting?
Well, to be clear, I raised at the February meeting, when we moved the February meeting, I said, I was 2 meetings that I have a problem with, February and April. I'm asking to move February because I'm not asking to move April. So my problem with April has been discussed.
And I did actually ask to move April.
And I've been aware that the April meeting would go either from Patriots' Day weekend to Easter thereafter, and either way was problematic, probably, for having 7 people around the table. And so I've, in my head, been thinking there was a strong likelihood that something was going to happen with April. I didn't know what. Okay. So.
We should have had a facilitator just for this.
Thank you, Mr. Terrell. Mike, could you make an April 28th meeting here that was overseers in the morning, break for lunch, and reconvene at 2 o'clock?
Yeah, I think so. I'll say yes now, yeah.
And then we would, our next meeting, as Vicki noted, we would cue to our calendar, would be 2 weeks after that, on the 12th of May.
Henry?
Michael?
Would it make sense to shift it from 9 to 8 on that day, just so that people that are leaving after have a little bit more time to get out?
Okay, so
Does that help Michael or not? Or, yeah.
It always helps me, I'm a morning person.
I'm sorry, which day,
You don't like that?
which?
On the 28th. yeah.
Lee doesn't like that.
He can't walk, he can't move.
No,
It was just a suggestion.
we moved to 8 o'clock meetings, I think, in June. I want to stay with that, because the public is starting to get that in their head, too.
All right, okay.
So,
That's fine.
I think so, we're still in discussion here, that it would be a 9 o'clock meeting on April 28th. We would make sure that that meeting is over by a point to break for lunch, and we would reconvene at 2 p.m., and that would be a workshop, a public workshop. And I will get back to you all shortly with details of what that might look like, and if we have to have a facilitator. If we do have to have a facilitator, that person would likely want to be paid. I don't know what's involved in that at the moment. I'm just going to gather some information and return to you with ideas. Judy?
And apropos of that, because we have a very tight budget this year, I think that we would benefit from having the 1 hour conversation to see how we function in that workshop setting. And if it turns out that we don't have common understandings, then we maybe schedule another one later. Because I don't want to spend money if what we're talking about is process, and if we all feel as though we're fine with process.
Okay.
Well, then we might not need a paid facilitator.
Right, that's what I'm
So
saying.
we try the 28th thing
Be
and
grown up on
then,
the 28th.
I'm just trying to.
Michael? Mike?
I'd love to see us be as productive as possible, so sometimes having a facilitator just moves it along, but I don't want to spend money either. So what do we think, like, somebody likes this cost? Is it $50? Is it $1,000? I have no idea.
Steve?
I don't know what the cost is, but 1 hour is not gonna cost you any more than 2 or 3 hours.
Okay, because they have to
They're
prep.
not gonna come up here and do
It's a half
something
day.
for $50.
Right, so it's going to be.
So you might, if you go into it, I think you're gonna find it's gonna be worthwhile to do a longer period.
Right, it's a $500 cost, it's
I
$700
think that's
day.
realistic, yeah.
Yeah, I
I
think
guess
that's,
I'm just,
Michael?
I'm new, of course, so I'll be saying that for 5 years at least. But I don't understand why I guess I don't understand the meeting, that it would be a meeting that needs to be facilitated when we meet all the time. I'm trying to understand why a facilitator, I guess this meeting is something different than I understand it to be.
Vicki?
It's my understanding, correct me, that the meeting is to help us define the boundaries between the different committees. in anticipation of lots of questions and perhaps controversy that might come up over the summer. And so we can be a little more grounded in appropriate procedures of handling this within ourselves and within the discussions of the community.
Like that.
I'm just
I
paraphrasing.
like that.
Did you get that on the tape?
Lee?
I think we can handle this ourselves. I don't think we need to spend an extra $500 to hire somebody. You know, we can't spend any extra money.
Right.
Well, we just lost a facilitator.
Well, also, given that we then have to worry about the facilitator schedule.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay, I will agree with that as long as, because, you know, I think it's always a learning process, and we can learn from other people, that if it is not successful, obviously, then we'll go back and relook at it.
Well, essentially-
Revisit it, okay?
Essentially, I serve as the facilitator for these meetings. And what I would do is I would present to the overseers a suggested list of topics and how we might move through this, and would facilitate that meeting. I'm happy to do so. I've done it before,
Yeah, and you can
and I
come.
do it here. So,
You do it every month.
okay. I think we have an open motion on the floor to move ahead with this.
To change the date, and then,
Do we have a date on the motion?
Well,
I don't remember the motion. It was your motion, and I seconded it.
Oh,
Yeah, that was
I had
before
so
the date.
moved. I
Yeah,
had so
before
moved.
the date.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that the date needs to be in the motion.
And then all the motion also, how about I rescind, take back my motion, because I think it also included the facilitator piece, but we've decided against the facilitator piece after the discussion. So I'll take back that motion and we'll.
Okay, and can I have a new one then?
I move that we schedule a workshop to discuss committee procedures and process in anticipation of the public hearings that we hope to schedule this summer, and that be held on
April
April
28th.
28th at 2 p.m.
And at the same time that we move the overseers meeting in April to the 28th.
Second.
Second by Lee. Any further discussion?
I would just suggest that, me personally, I'm gonna get all my dates in order of things we're doing this summer, so that we can throw those out, so that's one of the things I wanna talk about is coordinating all the dates. So I think that's a good part of it. It's just discussion. It's not something.
And I would like to add that, exactly. So I would like to go into this meeting with some sort of master calendar of, May 1st through October 1st, or whatever we anticipate, of when are the public meetings, when are the various points along the way that we have to be making decisions, including the budget, et cetera, including warrants for the, all these pieces together so we can understand what's in front of us.
Great.
Vicki? Any further discussion?
Would it be absurd to have the meal catered?
It would not be, except that I understand the cost
Oh,
issue is
say
concerned.
$500.
Potluck.
I'll bring Subway.
Potluck.
I think potluck is a very good idea,
Yeah, that's good.
and I think each of us can contribute in some way. We'll
You bring
figure that
that
out.
Okay.
Or I can bring sloppy joes.
There we go. Further, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That's approved. That'll be the second.
I did want to go back to the one item before, and that's why I raised my hand before. I think one of the reasons we're talking about having this little summation thing is that the meeting minutes have been coming out so late. And I would just suggest that you might not have to do this thing if you get the draft meeting minutes out within a few days to a week. Then that would satisfy us, because remember, they're just draft, they don't have to be perfect. It's more of, it's almost like the draft one could be kind of what we just talked about, but just with kind of the votes and things in there too.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. The minutes of these, first of all, they're purposely called notes because they aren't minutes, they're not a verbatim discussion.
Right.
That's what the tape is all about, so they can be streamlined. So-and-so moved, discussion was had.
Right.
It doesn't matter what was discussed, because what happens in these notes is we elevate one person's comment over another one
Right.
by simply saying, Mike said this, or Judy said this, and
Right.
we lose the good comment by Lee, lose all that.
Yeah,
Then
it shouldn't
have
be
the
a he
action.
said, she said kind of thing.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then Steve does, he's our conscience, he always keeps track of what we have voted.
Right.
Because he's the one always saying, we already voted $500 for this, you already did this. We can be disciplined in keeping those as action items.
Right.
I love that you want to do that, And I think that this streamlined process will make it easier for you too. You will be reminding us what we voted.
Since we have a new office manager, and Judy is suggesting a new, more streamlined process, let's move forward with that, take a few months and see how that works. If that still doesn't get us to that point, I'll return to this issue later in the summer.
Exactly,
But
and then we can-
happy to back off of another task.
It's just one less thing that she has to do if we can do it all. You have to do it anyway, so just do it soon.
Yeah, I'd rather do it soon anyway while it's fresh.
While it's still in
Yeah.
effect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So like, for example, that first motion that Vicki pulled back, that doesn't need to be in the notice?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Excellent. Report of the treasurer.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So, we have warrants that are going to circulate. You all received by email financials for last month. I'm not going to cover those because they're all pretty straightforward. This time of year is particularly boring and benign. We rarely have major problems. So, any questions about those? I had asked you if you did have some to raise those, and I do my best to answer them. No questions? Great. So, old business. A reminder that we need to review the safety budget for 2020 at the next overseers meeting. This is part of the process to take the budget process and break it down into more manageable pieces. Michael, I will get you some detail to use as sort of a format so everybody's working with the same information. Keeping in mind that no matter what is discussed at these smaller meetings, it can be changed up until the final approval by the overseers. But this just helps us get a framework so we know what we're working with going through the year. Second reminder, I will not be here for the April, well, I don't know if I'll be here for the April meeting or not, maybe, but if I am not here, we need to look at infrastructure the following month.
Yep.
So just to make sure we have those up and running. I would like a motion from someone to allow us to pay our bills. So since we have moved the April meeting to the 28th, we are going to delay payment to the vendors to very, very late. So if someone would just move to allow me to sign and send the checks, and you'll still approve the warrants at the 28th meeting, but the vendors won't have to wait an extra 3 weeks for their money.
I move that the process of releasing checks this month be consistent with the application for payment regardless of what our next meeting is.
Did anyone second that?
I second.
And did anyone vote?
Sorry, I wasn't here.
Any
Any further
discussion?
discussion on that issue? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and the last piece that I have, if you just pass these around, those are last year's warrants for the annual meeting, with the exception of the supplemental warrant, which we won't need. And I just marked up the copy and want to walk through these quickly, because this is one piece of simplifying the budget process. So once you have a copy, you can run through these, I think, very quickly.
Apropos of that, Steve, I'm going to be looking at, or suggesting that we add a warrant that expressly authorizes the overseers to adopt ordinances throughout the year.
That's fine, we'll wait and do that
Oh,
afterwards.
sure.
Okay. So starting at the beginning, Article 1, we always choose a moderator. Does anybody see a reason to change that? Article 2 is the President's report. That's pretty much bulletproof. Article 3 is the Treasurer's report. Article 4 is developed as part of the budgeting process, so you'll note that I wrote in there revised. So as we go through the budget process, that will reflect whatever the overseers approve as a final budget. Article 5 is really just a way to protect ourselves with a tax anticipation note if we need money. That's something that's been at the annual meeting for as long as I've been around, and probably long before that. And that gets revised to reflect what the budget actually is. Article 6 is a emergency repair provision, which again is something that's been in the annual meeting for years. It was increased to $500,000 last year because I think we agreed that $250,000 or whatever it had been in the past would not be sufficient. Article 7 we will delete. This was an approval to carry over infrastructure funds if we needed to, but by some minor miracle, the infrastructure committee and Billy were able to get everything done, so we did not need to do that. And at this point, I don't foresee us doing the same sort of thing. We'll have no carryover funds available. Article 8 is an engineering study for repair of the seawall that the infrastructure committee's been worked on. We may replace that with something, but this article that was in there last year will go away. Article 9, we have an article in there to use funds to get the cruiser. We will have funds remaining in that account, and I would recommend that we have a motion to have the voters approve moving those reserves to general reserves, because we aren't going to need a cruiser for quite some time from what I can see. So if that's okay, I'll just write that out. You'll approve all of these at that June overseers meeting. The tax rate is just one of those things. We follow what the town of Northport does. And my understanding is Article 11, we don't need to worry about anymore because we have elected a president, that term is in place. Article 12, we can delete because that's been handled. And Article 13 will be to elect a clerk for 3 years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Beautiful. Article 14, once again, we'll delete that because that was handled. Article 15, we will delete that because that's been handled. All of these relate to changing overseer terms and officer terms to a staggered basis, which leaves us with Article 16, which I now believe is going to be elect 2 overseers for 3-year terms. Correct. Do I have that all right? Beautiful. And then reports of committees. And the last piece is just we need to update overseers. So there are some additions that I anticipate. So I do anticipate, Judy, you want to talk about what you'd like to have?
Right, you need to have, I think it would be wise to have a warrant item which authorizes the overseers to adopt ordinances after public hearings generally. We are doing waterfront conversation, dock conversation, we're having conversations about the zoning. If the responses to surveys and public hearings inspire change. One of the questions is always posed to me is, when do we need to have a public hearing? If we put in here this, not when do we need to have a public hearing. The question is always posed, do the overseers adopt it or is it adopted at the annual meeting? And there's certain things that have to be adopted at the annual meeting, but we have some flexibility as to the overseers adopting them if we have a warrant. So let's do that. Let's add a warrant authorizing the overseers after the public hearing to generally enact ordinances. I have one with president.
I have just a question. Would that be something that we would be essentially saying that we're doing this and then we would ask for the voters to ratify it in August, or it would just be set after that time? In other words, are we just doing it sort of in advance to get it going?
So that in September, October, and that intervening year, we will have authority to do ordinances. It will be one, it's a belt and suspenders. There's a lot of statutes that tell us we can do ordinances, like our fire works ordinance, like our fire ordinance, like cable, all of that.
Yeah.
But if the warrant also says expressly that the people have authorized us to adopt ordinances after public hearings, we have one more proof that we have the authority without falling back to the statute and saying which type of ordinance can we do, which can't we do. This way, we can do them all if they've approved it.
And so they've been approved at the meeting.
The right to adopt an ordinance
Has been approved,
is,
but we might not have all the details. is what
Right.
you're saying. Okay.
and in any event, there will always need to be a public hearing about any ordinance.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Steve, to make a motion for that?
No, I don't think so. I think that we would
We don't.
approve that into the draft warrant, and then when we approve the warrant, that would be there. But that was just one thing I was thinking, we should be doing this when we don't do this. It's easier.
Shouldn't that be an update to the bylaws?
No, because you need the annual meeting people, you need the voters to approve and empower us to adopt all ordinances. It's not a bylaw proof, it's a every year you have to vote back.
So this would become a permanent warrant every year?
Right, just like the tax anticipation note is always on there.
I don't follow why that's necessary, and I'm usually pretty quick on the update.
Well, the ordinance authority for municipal officers is set by statute or set by the town meeting. There can be, which is our village meeting, there are some statutes that already give us authority to adopt ordinances.
And those are the legislative statutes.
Right, so our fireworks one.
Okay, great.
So we have that. There are some that because people haven't thought, Parking is a very good example. You're not going to find a statute that says that the overseers have authority to adopt a parking ordinance. It's just silent as to it. Lots of towns, their selectmen nonetheless adopt a parking ordinance. Most of the time, it's not challenged. But if the voters have imbued the power to adopt an ordinance to the overseers, then that question is resolved. That's the point.
But
Every year-
Thank you, that's
if,
helpful.
if we hardwired this into the bylaws and asked the voters to approve a revised bylaws, would that take care of this issue?
No, because a bylaw is not an ordinance making, it's a rule of order, it's a rule of process. It's not an empowerment by the people.
So I'll get the language and I'll plug it in.
Yeah, and I'll say to you, you know, quite frankly, this is what I do. I look at our ordinances for all our little seaside towns and I go, our warrants, I go, oh, that's a good one. Let's do that. I just take advantage of other people's better
I
ideas.
think that's great. The other one will be 1 or 2 warrants associated with the seawall, to be determined. I don't think we got the information to put those together yet. Based on the discussion we've had so far, what I think we're going to have is, you know, we would like you to vote sort of either or. You're going to approve this project at this cost or that project at that cost. Now, I don't know if that'll be the case, but there's going to be some future discussion, but I have a placeholder in the warrants to say we need to have something in there. It's because last year we missed the banking at the end of Wall Street, was that? We had to do a supplemental warrant.
Yes.
So what I'm trying to do is at least make sure we understand what we're going to need. If we can get it into the booklet, we'll do so. If we miss the publication date, we'll do a supplemental warrant. The key piece is to make sure we capture it wherever it may go. And do any of the overseers have any other warrants they would like to see in the annual meeting booklet? It's pretty straightforward. It's, you know, we always have a couple tweaks.
This is the occasion also to start to nag all of the committee chairs that they are responsible for writing up a not too long description of what their committee has accomplished or intends to accomplish or what the philosophy is. We leave that to the committee chairs to determine. And that material needs to get to Mandy by July 1st. A Word doc is always great. And just take a look at prior annual reports if you have questions to what that means.
What did you say the date was? It June 8th?
July 1st
Oh, July 1st.
is the deadline, which means that every overseers meeting between now and then, I shall be nagging you on this topic.
And it can't come in before July 1st, right?
It would be preferred to be in before July 1st. June 1st is excellent, May 1st is spectacular.
You get a gold star.
I currently hold the position of tree warden and tree committee. Is anybody object that I combine them all together in one report?
Please do.
Okay, just ask me.
Thank you.
And just from a scheduling reference, the minutes from last month include all those 2 dates.
Right.
Anything else, Steve?
That's it. Thank you very
Steve,
much.
I have a question, Steve.
Yes.
In reference to the safety committee discussion at the next meeting, can you elaborate on that?
What we have done historically is have the safety committee present their proposed budget for the following fiscal year. And there's discussion at that time to talk about, yeah, we think this makes sense, no, we ought to do something different, so that we don't have to do all those discussions in one meeting on a Saturday.
I see.
When we did all those together in one lump sum, it was a 4 or 5 hour meeting. And in recent years, by breaking this into smaller pieces, that meeting's about an hour.
Okay, so that's the safety committee's up first, and that's at the April meeting.
If that works for you, and that would, yes, that'd be the preference. Infrastructure is a little more complicated, so they're later in the time frame. And frankly, we have April and May to do this, and in June, we have the final budget meeting, so we don't have much wiggle room.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine to be clear. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else for Steve? Hearing none, we'll move on to the report of the village agent. Bill?
Yes, I have a request from Amy at the town of Northport. Who are you going to put in for the village representative in their annual book? They have it in their book. who the village representative is, while we don't officially have one? Who are you going to put in that book?
So is that an employee or is that an overseer?
Well, it has been the liaison person, which was, and.
Was Paul Nyron.
Right, yeah, I know, I remember what one.
And Vicki has been filling in, so I guess the question is, do you want to be named in the book?
The answer is Vicky.
Okay. So I'll pass that on so they can get that in the book.
They don't need a picture, do they?
It's at the bottom of the thing.
That picture thing.
As you know, it's been a tough winter. Right now, we got a couple frozen culverts that's not letting the water run through, and one of them, of course, is at my driveway.
I was wondering what the,
So I've had to, it was really eroding the road and stuff because the water continuously flows, so I've had to put a trench across the end of my driveway to help get it back in the ditch on the other side. So we're working on that, trying to get that straight. And one of the other things coming up is I'm going to have to go out of the round to get somebody to clean the community hall this year. If you have anybody who wants to volunteer or however we've been doing it, to do the one-time cleanup for the community hall. We'll try to figure that out, because the other thing is, you know, you gotta have the insurances and everything if you know, if they're not an employee, so. The only other thing is, do we go to a company to come in and do the one time?
When does that occur?
Usually it used to occur right after the yacht club took the sailing mass out, but they have it stored in there, so it can start any time that it gets warm enough to be up there. It's usually into June. I mean, not the end of June, into May.
Just any idea how long it took Carla to do that?
About 8 hours.
She spent a day in there cleaning and dusting
And it's a mess this year because of all the electrical work and stuff we had done, so it is a lot dirtier than normal.
so what would a service master charge us to do something like that?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head because I didn't investigate that yet, what the charge would be. I probably could look back and see what we had them when we had them for utilities for the problem we had with James. Or I can call them up and find out.
Lee?
Why don't we ask Bayside Arts whether they would do it?
Excellent idea. A lot of them aren't here early enough.
I would prefer not to, in that I have to respond to Bayside Arts with some information that they may not want to hear. And so to layer on top of that a request for them, I don't think that'll fly.
But I think that goes, I mean, I think I'm sort of going where he's not. I'm thinking, could we get some community volunteers to go in there and do the first, and again, not sure what, we asked that everybody using it cleaned up afterwards, so there was maybe a general oversight, but nobody cleaned up during the course of the summer. We just did the major cleanup in the springtime to make sure it was appropriate. And I'm wondering if we can get community volunteers. How, can we explore that? We've got a month to explore it, right?
And let me add one thing to that. The mess that was discovered late last fall in the refrigerator and freezer is still there.
I think this is a
Why did
professional
that
job,
happen?
actually. I think this is a job not for community volunteers.
Because whoever used it didn't.
Well, how come it wasn't removed when it was discovered? But that's a whole nother issue. Okay,
Because I didn't want to clean it.
I understand that, but if we'd let
You look at
somebody
it,
know,
it's
somebody
fine.
might have cleaned it.
I
Okay.
didn't think it was my responsibility.
No, but if you discovered it, I would suggest that it's your responsibility to let us know that we needed
I
to
did.
clean
I
it.
told you last fall.
Oh, I don't recall.
I mentioned it at a meeting.
I don't
Matter of
recall
fact, I think Steve even went up and looked at it.
No, I missed that one.
that. Okay, okay,
All right.
where's that one? Okay, let's move.
Judy?
I think that the idea of community volunteers is wonderful, but I don't want to be unrealistic on that. I would ask that Billy get us a price from Service Master or a local cleaning company. My preference would be if somebody in Northport cleans and does it well, I'd rather pay for our neighbors. But then when our April meeting, we'll know, and that gives us time to make the next step.
I agree with that.
Service Master's going to be the only one that's going to be able to fill out the paperwork if
Well,
if
you
that's
have
what you
Serv-
want.
You have
Right.
ServPro too about that.
Well, sir,
Well, that's what I kind of meant anyways.
so we didn't ask all that paperwork from Carla,
Because she was an employee.
an employee.
And I would ask that Mandy or Billy, before our next meeting, and in fact this week, get whatever's in that refrigerator out of there.
This may be out of line. Could I say something on that?
Sure. What?
I'm just sitting here as, I don't think this was, it's a yacht club representative, I guess. One of them met several. It's a yacht club thing?
I don't know.
Well, why doesn't the responsible party have to clean it up?
Because we don't know who it
And if
was.
it is a yacht club,
We don't know who it
I'll put
was.
on here and I'll take care of it.
Right, but we don't know who it
So,
was.
if that's able to be I don't believe it is.
I don't think at this point we're placing blame. At this point,
That's
get it
Okay,
out of
all
there.
right.
March.
I was just offering to be a volunteer.
Thank you.
Oh, that's
I'd rather volunteer if it's part of a group that I'm.
It definitely was the yacht clubs. We have a volunteer.
Judy?
I would suggest that at the termination of each event, that the office manager do an inspection. Then we know who it is. There's a set of rules that they buy into, so it would be so much easier henceforth for Mandy to say, oh, I see you left something in the freezer, come by and pick it up. So,
And I want to say in hindsight, when it was one of the issues that I took on when I first started, and it was my understanding that that was happening at the time, and it may have slipped, but as a reinforcement.
I'll note that our meeting in April is on the 28th, and that that's a full month from now, and that seems like more than enough time. Bill, I'm going to assume that a Servpro or somebody would have to come by and take a look at it before they give you an estimate. So if that could happen in the next few weeks, and you could give by an email, just shoot us information as to what that price is, we can go into that meeting knowing what we need to know, perhaps ready to make a decision. And if there are 2 or 3 estimates, obviously, the sooner the better. Mike?
Can we just authorize up to a number, and then we could just do it, or
Bill is authorized up to $500 to pay for anything.
you think it'll be more than that? Okay, so why don't we authorize him to do it?
if it's within his authority. if
He
it's
doesn't
less
need
than that.
authorization.
Yeah, he doesn't need authorization if it's less than that. I guess what Mike is saying was reinforce that, of course, if it's less than what you need to hear from us, then go ahead and
Get it done.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
All right, let's see, the other thing, one thing that I want to touch on is, I need a little clarification on, do we know that, did we set up a price for this proactive thing that we were gonna do with the wharf maintenance? Did we come up with a magic number? I don't remember.
We have been talking about 4,000 a year, is what we've been talking about.
Right.
And I think that's built, baked in there somewhere.
That's the number we're working with.
Yeah.
So 4,000? And in that, because we don't know whether we're gonna have any repairs this year or not, because we haven't had our inspection. Okay, so 4,000. So other than that, the other, it's looking to be pretty busy for me coming up this spring with all contractors that are already lining up at the door for everything going on, so.
Right, and this particular winter has been pretty hard on the road, so we will be exploring those over the next month as things start to freeze and thaw some more, and so.
And so with all your committees you got going here and stuff, a lot of things that I normally probably would talk to you about is all, I believe, all gonna be coming up from all the committee chairs. So, that's it for me.
Thank you, sir. Which moves us to the committee reports.
No officer report?
Oh, I apologize. My mind is going. Office manager,
I can brief you on some.
please, I apologize.
Okay, well, I've only been here for, about a month now. Things have been going pretty smoothly. I feel like it's been an eventful month, perhaps. We've had an audit, and we did our first water billing and all of that. I have good grasp on the ideas surrounding this position. I'm just still learning some procedures, so I appreciate everybody's patience as I do that. Other than that, I really don't have much to say yet. I'm still absorbing and learning. I've learned a lot so far, so I've enjoyed it, and I really appreciate being here.
Normally at this time of year is when we get requests for uses for the community hall. Have you
Yes.
received any requests? Because generally those are presented to us,
Okay.
not necessarily that we have to approve,
Sure.
but we keep an understanding of what's happening there.
Okay, I do have this folder. A lot of it is what Bayside Arts submitted.
Right, okay, and we've
And
got that.
and there are a couple, I think Amy gave them to you prior to her leaving. I can pass this around.
Could I suggest, could I volunteer, since a couple years ago, we tried to get the use of the community hall into some sort of organized procedure?
Yeah.
That I help Amy in the next month to get it?
I think Mandy would be better to
I'm
help.
sorry.
It's okay.
I'm sorry, Amy. Is
Yeah.
that okay with everybody to get back and we can present the procedure so that everybody knows?
Yeah.
And we'll get together.
That would be
one day
extremely
later.
helpful. I know
Thank you.
Amy does have like a calendar set up on the computer, but we haven't had a chance to really.
No, but there are appropriate forms, and
Right.
then we discovered there were old forms, and
Yeah.
a little confusion there, so just to
Absolutely.
help clarify it.
Absolutely, that would help me tremendously.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Vicki, much appreciated. Now I will, and that's it?
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Now we'll move to committee reports, and we will start, by the way, is the order that we have of the committee reports, I personally don't care. The overseers want to see a different order in terms of, you asked at one point to move to the top, and I know it was for a reason that may not exist any longer. Do you care? Is this,
I like being at the top.
you like being at the top? Well, there's,
Mine is sort of fluffy relief, okay? Everybody think trees. If you want to move me, you certainly can, but right now, today, I'm at the top.
all right, then we start with our tree
Trees.
warden / tree planting, Vicki Mack.
And I am so happy because I can report that all of the tree work that we had planned has been completed. Mother Nature took care of one, we were so happy, saved us money. But the big tree at the end of Bayview Park has been trimmed and pruned. And honest to God, it looks like a new haircut. And so I'm amazed. It took them 3 days. One day they were cut short because of weather. It cost us $2,000, but it's a beautiful old tree. This is what it looked like in the fall. I'm sorry I didn't have one before the pruning, but I'll pass these around. Anyway, since we don't have anything on record that needs to come down at this point, can you hear me, Michael?
I'm knocking on wood, sorry.
Yeah, right, knock on wood, yeah, till the summer people come, or our summer residents, our steam summer residents. I would like to, my intent is, first of all, I want to give great accolades to Goodrich and Lerman, who was the tree service that accomplished all this over the winter. And they've been really great at communicating and, I might say, paying their bills, or sending us the bills so we could pay them. Anyway, I would like to have him come and look at some of our beautiful, big, old trees and get them as healthy looking as I think this one will look as it comes springtime. So that's our goal there. So that's a very good thing. Other than that, I was just going to make a couple announcements. One was this Tuesday thing, just so people knew. This is a little out of place, but the other thing I became aware of, and I forgot the flyer for it, there's a company here that does composting. So if,
Street side, like, sorry.
no, it's got, yeah, you take your compost, you leave it out, and it's something like $5 a pickup. They come and pick up your compost, but then they will bring the compost so that you can use so I do have the flyer for that. I will either send it out so just you're aware of it, but I think it's an interesting service and business that they have that might be very, it might give some interest to our residents and such. So,
Garbage to garden?
yes, basically, yeah, something like that. I don't think that's the name of it.
Yeah, that is.
In Portland it is, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think this is a local.
Great.
Yeah, but it's got some catchy little name. So I thought I had the flyer with me, but I don't. So I'm done. Thank you.
Judy?
Well, I just want to piggyback off that because we do Garbage and Garden in Bath. It's a Portland company, and our transfer station, our landfill, has reduced their burden by 40% since we started this. And when we're talking about our 40%, because, and that doesn't even talk about the impact on the sewer system because people aren't using their garbage disposal.
Well, if this was.
This is hugely important to encourage people to do when we have a new trash contract that we're going to be talking about very quickly.
Oh, yeah. The other thing I did, as far as trees, yes, it was all news to me, I gotta get out more. If you do know of a tree, that is a question. The other thing we're going to be looking at is where to start planting trees. And as I've said before, once the tree committee gets together, we're gonna look at updating the tree ordinance, so to speak. So those three things are on the books, or on the schedule.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Would that be something that would be, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I have one more thing to add here.
Michael, yes, go.
You recall that I took adoption of the tree between Terracon and the yacht club,
Yes.
and it was pruned this week at putting the village of $1,700.
And we thank you so much for this. Obviously, this pruning is very expensive for some of these big old trees, so the equipment involved and stuff is what makes that.
Michael, if you submit that bill that you paid to John or Steve, he will give you a tax receipt.
Okay.
That is a contribution to an entity that, just like if you were paying to the town to New York City, you would get a tax deduction, you know? So, thank you, but secondly, there is a benefit to you as well, and we can get you that letter.
Okay.
It's not, I don't think it's on here, but as I did send out after the last meeting that I was at the town meeting and Bill was also, where they were talking about the trash contract. They're going to be opening bids tomorrow. I intend to be at that meeting, and again, if it's okay with everybody, I will send out an email. Oh, yeah.
I just want to clarify, that meeting has been canceled, supposedly you know about it.
Tomorrow's meeting?
Yes, about opening up the trash contracts.
No.
It's been canceled to April, I don't remember, I want to say 8th, but I'm not sure.
Okay, well, as soon as they have that meeting and they open the contracts, if it's okay, again, we'll send out the information that they have, and then we can evaluate how it impacts us. And as you may or may not know, last week's New York Times had a huge article about the cost of recycling, and how many communities, much larger than ours, are not able to do that anymore. So hopefully this will be a more positive response.
Judy?
I don't know if this is a question for the tree or for safety, and Michael, I did read your notes, and if I didn't see this, but I may have overlooked it. What about the planning around the basketball court? Where are we on that?
That's not a tree thing, that's a separate
That's
safety.
fallen into a little bit of another land.
Okay.
It's unfair to me whether we fill up the materials, whether they live through the winter. And Steve and I talked about it this week. It's not been budgeted apparently. It's not, there's no money in the budget for it. So I don't know if we'll go forward with that.
Okay.
I don't have an answer because, mostly because of this issue of the materials.
Got it. Steve?
So the overseers, I think in late September, October, approved a design that we would use when and if we ever went forward, rather than going back and revisiting this every year. We were well past the annual budget at that point, so it was not budgeted. There are funds in the contingency fund if the overseer should decide that that's a project they'd like to tackle. So,
I mean, if that's a myth, but that meeting reflects, I think, a number of 2,000 or 2,500 at the time that we had one budget talked about. And my expectation is we would do something that was no more than $1,000 to be associated with the village. The rest is donated from materials and that kind of thing. But I think the issue of materials, that's a big piece of it, and I understand that they may not have that money.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anything else, Vicki?
No, I'm good.
Communications, I'm sorry, Mike?
I'm confused, does that mean that we're gonna spend 1,000? Is that what we just said?
No, we only approved the design. And we approved the design based on 2,500. Since then, we had a generous offer to reduce that, but as I understand it, it's premised upon whether the contribution, that donation was going to be in the form of the materials may no longer be available to us.
Oh, okay.
So we need to, we know what we want to do if we're going to do it.
Great, okay, thanks.
That's how I heard it.
Yeah. Communications Committee, Judy?
I'm going to bundle communications and governance because the governance piece is now communications. You've heard me talk about the survey. On March 4th, the committee received from me the consolidation of all people's comments about the survey. Danny, after I sent you all the survey, Danny last night sent, or yesterday afternoon, sent some very good edits to this. It's going to be the edited version of the thing that I sent out to you all yesterday. That's going to be submitted. Remember, this is only one piece of 3 pieces of communication that we're essentially trying to do. We're trying to ask people online about this. We're trying to encourage them to come talk to meetings about this. And then, if there is a this that becomes a recommendation for action, there'll be meetings about action. You'll note on what I sent you all that I have put in here that there will be a public hearing on Saturday, May 25th at 4 p.m. I consciously chose the afternoon because we have received criticisms in the past about our actions, our public meetings being in the mornings. I'm trying to make sure that we take into consideration the people's interest in coming. So if you saw any outrageous errors on this, then I would love to hear them. Danny's a very careful editor, and so I'm going to be adopting all of his recommendations that came in last night, and you'll see this back both on baysidemaine.com through a SurveyMonkey type setting. I think we'll also have some sitting on the counter here. I don't think that we'll do a mailing because there's no point in spending money on it if we're going to do any public hearings.
So the hearing on the 25th at 4 o'clock Saturday is for
the general conversation about what's your vision for the village. There's no draft, there's no...
Would you expect to have responses from the survey by then?
Absolutely. Okay.
And that will be held in this building, I assume?
Yeah.
I have another communication thing. Everything you said
No,
sounds
so that's
great.
no questions on that?
None.
Okay, that's all I had to report, so.
I just had a general question about sort of disseminating information, and I was wondering...
Can't hear Mike that well.
All right, wait, I'll speak up. I just,
Thanks.
Okay, we just rejiggered the phone there, Mike. Is that better?
Thank you, yep.
I had a general question, and that is it time in Bayside sort of life that we have our own sort of website as opposed to it being run by Danny, so that it kind of just has all our minutes and everything there, and then we just pay a little fee to have it backed up, and everything is locked in and we have control over it. I just feel like that's kind of the norm now, and I just thought I'd bring that up and ask the Communication Committee what they thought.
I can give you, in response, the history of that.
Okay.
Danny's website started primarily in response to the mussel rafts. And he wanted to get information out there on his own because he was concerned about the mussel rafts. At that time, he also, of course, wanted to create an environment of people who love Bayside.
Yeah.
And he wanted to, and so he built in an information resource. All our minutes are there, our memberships are there. But there was some anxiety by people who sat on the board, that Peter Allen in particular, who was the communications chair, that he didn't like that we were perhaps being filtered. So he worked, and there was no sense that there was any filtering, but you want to speak with your own voice. Yeah. And so this is 15 years ago, I guess, worked very hard to create our own website.
Okay.
And I think we even had one. No one ever went to it.
Judy Rovita created.
Okay, and they worked together. And no one went to it, and it was never as up to date as Danny. So I think there got to be a point where essentially people said, well, Danny's so free and willing to share. Why are we trying to reinvent a wheel that costs us money? That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have that conversation. It's just that's where we ended up 15 years ago, was Danny has provided this useful tool. He doesn't filter, he doesn't create an agenda. His family is wonderful, and we haven't ever looked at it again. I'm happy to look at it. I have no skill in that area.
Lee?
I think we'd be better off to stick with Danny. Number one, we've already got the community accustomed to going there, and you're going to have to re-educate everybody, and it's just another item of work for this board to do when we're already overworked to start with.
Vicki?
I think there may come a time when we don't have a free volunteer to do this for us, and then we'll have to deal with it. I agree with Lee to not rock the boat at this time, and if there comes a time when Dan doesn't want to do it anymore, then we address it. But I think it does it okay. I think it's more than okay.
We've been very well served by the Webster family, and it certainly has made my life easy. And I know you're not suggesting that we haven't been.
No,
it's made
that
my
has
life
nothing
very
to do with
easy.
it. I just, yeah, and maybe there's a way to create a static page that we don't have to update that points people to that. I don't know. It just seems strange to go to this for the village that everything's about optics sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the optics are that there's this privately run website with all of our stuff on it. And it's just something to consider if maybe we have a way that we can have something static that points to it and we're done.
And it's maybe something that, again, a committee later on or
It's
something,
just that-
next winter can look at. I would be in favor of maybe looking for something where we put our notes. It was described to me, there's a way. There's a way to, put in this word that says, safety, and come up with every, committee note that has safety in it or something that makes searching through these notes a little bit easier, so you don't have to read 3 years of notes to find out exactly what you're looking for. Something like that would serve us better. Anyway, but it's okay.
I think before I became an overseer, had conversations with Dan about this very issue. And I agree with you that it seemed peculiar then, and it still does, that an entity such as ours has its official information moved through essentially a private website, and what looks to be a website that doesn't contain information like ours. You do have to look at it and know where to go. And so Dan is extremely open to changing aspects of the navigation on the site such that it is more clear that the Northport Village Corporation has its information there, and or to change the design of the site such that our information is more easy to search, etc. So Dan's open to all these things. I think that I agree with Judy that it feels like, and Lee, we have something going now. It's free. Everyone knows where to go to create something new, unless you're right, it's a static page that says, by the way, go over here. And I'm not sure, then if you Google currently Northport Village Corporation, you will come to Dan's site. So I'm not too concerned about that. I do think we could work on elaborating what this board does and how it looks on that site.
And I do think it's important to remind that it's not the official public notice. Our public notices, we're grateful that he puts them all on, but it's not a substitute for what we legally have to do. And we legally post on all the bulletin boards and in the newspaper when we have to. But it is a useful tool.
But legally, and the way people get information these days are two different things. That's like saying, well, we put it in the newspaper, but people go online for their news more. So
I think this
it's official and it's being done right. It's just.
If we want to continue this conversation, I think that Dan Webster should be brought into it and hear his perspective on it.
Again, I just brought it up as an issue that I'd love to see addressed by the governance committee. Now, we don't have to do it today.
Or the communications committee.
You do them both, so.
All right, moving on. Judy.
And I don't have anything on finance.
Thank you. Mr. Lannon, that leads us to the Infrastructure Committee.
So the good news is we've got markings on the ground. The bad news is the DigSafe guys haven't been out there yet, right, Billy?
We haven't got a DigSafe request on the computer yet.
We haven't.
I haven't sent it up.
Okay. So, right now, the tentative schedule is April 1st. They're supposed to do the borings for the seawall, the geotech stuff. Obviously, there's no snow out there now, and the borings are marked. And Water and Sewer has done our portion of the dig safe. We were waiting for the other utilities to do theirs. And assuming they do it, we will move forward and stick to the schedule. And the schedule, I'm not going to get deep into it today. We'll get into it next month, the schedule deeply. But the goal is to get to a point where we either make a decision this year that there's one of the two options that stands out as the best, or we decide that we pick one and then we do finisher design and so on. Part of that is what Lee has been talking about, which is when we get this report, we're going to go out and try to get people to design, build, give us cost. Take it from this point all the way on. I had a lot of discussion with the engineer because they were somewhat concerned that their drawings would be used as a final design, even though there wasn't final design. But again, that's just them worrying about their insurance and everything else. So I assured them that it was going to, don't stamp anything because doesn't need to be stamped. It's just this is for information, and then you, Mr. Contractor, would take on all the responsibility to either have to get bonds or however they want to finish it. They would have to submit stamp drawings by somebody when they did that, as part of that. So we're going to get that done, and it's going to happen this year. We're moving forward with it. And we will have public meetings, and again, we'll talk about all that next week. One of the things in that is because of and we came in, right now we're under the amount allotted because we don't have meetings for them to attend in there right now, because we don't know how that's going to shake out. It's going to depend on how we need them. And so there is still some money for that. Some of it is some of that North Street money too, because we're basically going to do that Tootsie Roll type of thing. If Bernanke ever gives me the quote, he keeps talking about it. So,
Are we committed to hiring Bernanke?
No, not until he gives me something in concrete, other than just ideas. Okay? And then if not, we can always go back to the engineering firm and have them do this, but it would be a little bit more. They are actually going to take a look at it, sort of, as part of this other project and give us some ideas, without charging us a lot for that.
What I would like
Yes.
is, you are so very smart, but I want to know that Lee and Dick are involved in each of these steps along the way. And I know it's hard to organize meetings, but I think that these three brains together are smarter than any single one of them. And I really want you to be at these meetings as well, talking to the engineer. I get this sense that because you're so driven and so efficient, that we're not getting the benefit of the reality-based, this guy's Yankee ingenuity. And that just may be me, but I just want to make sure that there's been community meetings on this.
Yes, and I've tried a few times to schedule one, and we haven't had much response.
It's very
this time of year.
Yeah.
It's basically Art and Billy and I have been able to attend them so far, and we're going to continue to do that. I did send out the contract for comments from the committee, okay? And then when I didn't get responses, I just moved forward at this point. Okay? I can forward you back the email, but it
My
says
question is that, my recollection is that the overseers had approved we've gotten a type of design, and we were going forward with that. Now, we backed off from that, and we canceled that vote out, and
no.
decided to go back and look at other things because of a
We
clamor.
officially canceled it, because I know that, I don't think we've officially changed the recommendation. What we agreed to do was to take both of these to a 50% design, so that we can have this bid to get a design built from that point on. Because there was clearly enough public sentiment to revisit granite wall. So the original intent was to come up with a long-term design that would be the most
The
cost-effective.
30 people who took their time to come to the meeting here were pretty much universally agreed on one design. It was not the granite wall.
I understand that.
Now, I know maybe you talked to 4 people on Blair's porch, and they all thought granite was a great idea.
No, that's,
I mean, is that how that got
Dick,
changed?
this was discussed at a meeting that you weren't here on.
yeah, I think
So
it was a long
we did a
meeting.
compromise.
It was a very
We did-
long meeting.
We did a compromise at the
The original
in the
design,
meetings.
the original builder of the wall was here. We went through a whole bunch of stuff about that.
So Dick, you'll need to review the minutes either January or February. We had a very, very lengthy meeting. No plan has been taken off the table. But as a result of the continued conversation that we had about the revetment ideas and the granite ideas, we felt it was wise to assure that we were looking at that other option as well.
It was the January.
Yeah, that's what I thought, yeah. So, and I personally think that not locking into a decision when we were talking about pie in the sky numbers is sounder for all of us.
Well, there was the main discussion at that meeting was that the granite wall option, all the wall options, had some engineering things in it that maybe a design builder could streamline and save money. And if that was possible, we decided to. So the goal is to get this design to a point where we can send it out to those folks and they can actually bid on it. One of the, well, no, I just, one last.
That does not matter. Now, the other question I have is in the design-build contract.
Yes.
Do we lose a modicum of control of what the design looks like? When they're done?
I think, we haven't seen the product of this company yet, but I'm assuming it's gonna, at a 50% design, it's going to show what the seawall looks like. I mean, that's the intent, is it would be shown that this is what it is. And then, we do lose the sense of we won't have a design drawing of the final design until after we've selected them, if that's what you mean. But I think basically we're talking about something that's pretty straightforward, and we're gonna have this design done at this point. So when I look at what's the difference between the 50% and the 100% design is more of actual other more details that need to be done with support of the system, more so than what it looks like.
So we're able to provide very specific requirements as well, correct? Which
Yes.
would drive final appearance. And I assume that something with the design-build portion would include an acceptable design to the overseers.
Right, and that's what, and we're going to put that bid out ourselves. We're not having an engineering company put the bid out. That was part of their deal. They didn't want to be involved in that because they're not taking it to 100%. And we'll be able to put that in there, Dick, because the infrastructure committee will put that together.
My very limited experience with contractors like to make changes in the design for the convenience of the contractor. And there are times when those are not in the best interest of the customer.
Yes.
And having nobody on site to monitor the construction other than the engineering firm that was, the same company that, what I'm saying is we don't have an engineering oversight on the project.
Actually, let me clarify that. I actually have talked to our engineer, and they would be
Our engineers.
the
Three.
folks.
A
Yeah.
lot of them.
Three names.
Yeah, and they are willing to be included, and I think that's, like Steve said, one of the things we add to this design build is, oh, by the way, there will be construction oversight by them. They don't mind doing that, but as long as it's not, their product that's being built, that's what they're saying, is they're not taking their product to 100%. So they're not gonna take ownership of the design, but they will take ownership of oversight, if obviously they get paid.
Okay, Dick?
Yeah, it's just that the outfit that did this extensive study, which was quite good, we said, well, we don't really like what you came up with, so we're gonna go out and do it again. That's the one we're using to oversee the construction. It just worries me.
We could hire Duravel. If you want engineering oversight, we can find someone to do it.
Duravel's done this very well.
So, but I think the point is, we'll provide very specific scope. There'll be, bail-out clauses saying you've got to present something that's agreeable to us and materially meets the conditions we've given you. And we can find an independent third-party engineering firm to do the oversight. So then that I think covers all those bases.
Right.
I don't personally care one way or another what firm it is, because I don't have enough
I don't
experience. But I think having a firm do it is a good thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's important that we have that aspect for exactly what Dick is saying.
Okay, I hadn't read that in the,
Yeah.
between the lines, if it was going to be an engineering oversight contract.
We don't yet have it in place, I think that's why it probably wasn't
We need
mentioned.
it. Okay?
That would, and this is an email that from me to them that I should have CC'd the committee, and I apologize. In that particular one, they asked, well, do I, at the end of this, are we done? And I said, no, we want to have some oversight, so somebody's going to have to do oversight, so we might still have some work. So I think it's important that we do have the oversight, absolutely. Okay? Does that make sense? All right, other than that, infrastructure-wise, we do need to look at the roads that we're gonna do, and Bill and I need to talk about that quite a bit, because there are some things that need to be addressed there. And then with respect to, and I don't know how we get into this relative to the potential structure in the park situation.
We'll talk about that in utilities.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about that in utilities, but, the infrastructure committee is going to discuss how we can be involved to help with the overseers section of what does that mean to the village. And Dick smiles on that one, because he's really looking forward to getting involved in that.
He's got great ideas.
All right, great.
All right. Anything else, Randy?
That's good for right now.
Thank you very much. I'll definitely leave on track here. Utility committee?
All right, I'll report, and Mike will piggyback me. And Gordon is here as well. We met on Friday. All members were present except for Dick. We had first bid opening for the replacement of the water pipe that's coming down Cove Road. Tim Suttel from Durago is reviewing the bids that we received to assure that they met the requirements.
No, I'm okay. I'm going Cove Road. I'm just.
Right around the corner.
Not that she was. And a provisional vote was approved to hire Farley Landscaping to do that work. We were very pleased with them in the context of Maple, and they happened to be the low bid by approximately $10,000 and consistent with our own internal estimates. So presuming that their bid matched the specifications for the bid, the contract will be awarded to them. And the condition, of course, is that they can do it now if they get it done before Memorial Day, or otherwise it's the fall. So that's one action item. There's no action items on any building matters. Our plant is running beautifully. Dick did our specifications allow us 77 pounds of effluent, and he calculated out a per day thing, and it was something like 0.2. It was something ridiculous.
We're at like 2.7% on average over the year of our limit.
So we are doing very, very well. And that notwithstanding what Mike just referred to is because of the conditional elements of our 301H waiver, the EPA, now, and for worker safety, which actually is driving this very much. We are looking at modifications to the little building, relocating the little building, all of which is driven by the now year-round testing that we have to do as opposed to seasonal testing. We cannot have Fernie crawling into that building, which is not heated. So we had engaged Durago to do a report, a provisional report for us as to what our options were. We directed them to look at side streaming, creating a pipe under the road to somewhere to do the testing on this little side stream. We had them consider side streaming up to the bluff where we own property, where the little utility building is. Obviously, that's a third of a mile. And we've looked at them, we've asked them to look at the delivery systems for the testing we have to do, worker safety. One of the things that our brilliant superintendent asked them to look at was UV testing. And can we do this ultraviolet bacterial something? You can say this better than me. That gets rid of chemicals. And that has a lot of positive possibility for us if we can do it. It means a smaller reconfigured building. It may mean that there's not a reconfigured building anywhere else other than where the building is, climate's change notwithstanding. So they gave us their draft report on Friday.
Rough draft.
It is a very rough draft. They've asked us not to disseminate it beyond the utility committee because just as you would not want your first draft of your novel disseminated publicly, this is something that they want to be proud of before it's sent out. They gave us the rough draft because the guy principally charged with writing it had the flu. He hadn't had a chance to look at it. We've been asked through Dick to submit comments. They'll consider our comments. It is nonetheless their report for which we're paying. It will lay out all the options, and from there we will be learning which options we want to pursue. We will also need to be discussing if this UV works out, then that will, and not would, it sounded like a panacea, then we would need to go back to EPA and DEP because we'd have to do a test to see if it actually works, and that might change some of the timelines we work with. But I think we made great headway. Obviously, what if we have to build a building, then there's costs involved there. The sewer department has reserves. We obviously want a building to build only what we need. If we have to build it, we have to figure out where we're going to build it, and some options are right at the location of the little building, or across the street. We're looking at Fraser's Garden. There's issues there, and we're looking at
The circle.
Ruggles Park, the base of Ruggles Park, where some of us, Gordon and probably Marge, remember is the little building that used to be there. We're looking at incorporating ideas to make that aesthetically pleasing as well, but our principal drive is worker safety and accommodating our license.
Right, and I'd just like to add to that I think one thing that we need to talk about is that there's going to be a line here where I think the utility committee is responsible for funding the actual alternative that needs to be done. And then because it's in the park, and we decide to add and make it look like, you know, the museum or something, or one of the library things, and then that would be something that would be probably outside of that budget. So that's what we're going to talk about, sort of what the village part of it. I'm just trying to do the separation. So the infrastructure committee would talk about what we would look at for wherever it had to be once the utility committee decides that this is the recommended alternative to us, correct?
Well, I'm not sure I would agree that's correct, and that might be with some of the strategic planning things that we'd be talking about on April 28th.
Right,
I think
okay.
that the goal should be whatever is recommended to community be a consensus
Oh, no,
recommendation coming out of not. So I personally wouldn't want infrastructure committee and utilities committees going on dual tracks. I certainly think that they both are important. But the other important thing is when we get the final, we're supposed to have our comments in to Dick on this draft report in 2 weeks, so that when we have our meeting on April 12th, Tim will have been presenting, Tim from Dorigo will present his final report, and then we need to publicly say, this is what we know so far about options. Citizens, how do you feel about our options?
Right.
And there are going to be some numbers attached to those options. I think that's the next step, once we get the report, is to then bring the citizens to the room in some fashion.
You think we'll keep that meeting on the 12th, even though now the overseers is later?
I guess we'd ask the committee. Now,
Yeah.
I personally would want it on the 12th because we have a lot to do.
Yeah, I agree, because then we have time between then and
Yeah.
to.
I mean, I'm going to Nebraska, but I don't go till Thursday, till Saturday.
Okay.
So-
Got it.
Steve? So I understand you don't want to release information, but you made two statements that seem to contradict themselves. One, they're looking at side streaming to Bluff Road. The second, that there are 3 buildings that might be done down in the park. Have we ruled out Bluff Road?
No, we've not ruled out anything. The side streaming to Bluff Road is to a building, and the piping. We want every single option
Yep.
to be outlined.
Thanks.
We can imagine that that's an expensive option, but we're not assuming anything.
It's only money.
Yeah.
And Judy, when you refer to bringing the public into this process, are there specific venues you're thinking of, and is there a timeline that you're thinking of?
That will depend on what the final report says, but we would be wanting to introduce the report and what the utilities thoughts, the utility trustees' thoughts are on the report. I think the first idea was at least to send, not make, this is the draft, not make the citizens read the 40 pages. It would be here for people to pick up, but I am sure that the utility trustees are looking into the idea of a one-page summary, option A, option B. What do you think about it with the public hearing?
I also assume that'll be available electronically.
Yeah, I think they said that, right, Nancy?
Yeah.
It is my understanding that there are basically 3 utilities stages that we're going through. We have an immediate stage where we want to change out the liquid dechlorination to salt for Fernie's health. Fernie's going to quit if we don't do it.
For Fernie's health, but also by the fall, that stuff will freeze up, it'll gel up anyway. So we need even if we haven't got this other thing that's gonna take longer to do. Anyway, go ahead.
Keep going.
And secondly is the converting over to the year-round sampling, which is due December of 2020.
Right.
And then there's a third thing, which is far off, which is going to a secondary treatment. We've always sort of had that looming over us like the sword. That, I think, is an infrastructure issue if we want to look at long-term. Now, we've had some studies on secondary treatment on the plant as it is using the existing tanks. And it looked pretty good, as I recall. University of Maine engineering students ran that study. And so I think we need to be addressing the immediate problem, which is Fernie's employment, and that we're going to the solid dechlorination. That, I think, is a given. Right?
Yes.
That costed in the Cove Road job?
No.
Well, it's going to be, but it wasn't.
No, it got changed out and it's in this, all this,
In this study?
yeah.
No, it's actually a separate one. I haven't done it.
It is separate.
Yeah, but it's in the budget that was budgeted for this study, which is,
Yes, it's in the budget for that study now.
so that's a done, basically a done deal.
Yeah.
Part of the year.
There was a separate scope of work to do that other thing, but it's been done. They're both being done at the same time. We've both got drafts of both on file.
I think Dick gave me a rough estimate of what that's going to cost us, but I can't divulge that.
Anything else? Anything else for the utility committee?
No. I just want to reinforce the little plant. It's the little engine that could. It's a great little plant.
Good. Michael, the floor is yours.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Steve had a specific question. On the superintendent's report, there was a part that had failed, and we were ordering a repair of that part, and he asked Mike and me to say, why are we spending money on repairing a 30-year-old part instead of buying a new one? And we asked that question, the answer is because we got the new one. It was easier. I mean, to repair it, it wasn't going to cost as much money. It was easy peasy. But it was a good question to ask.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a plastic part that they now make in metal, so essentially.
I mean, it just didn't make sense to me, we're gonna fix something that's 30 years old. I mean, refrigerators don't last you any length of time. I know this is a different critter.
Right. That was a good question. Dick was pleased to get it.
Good. Now, Michael Terrell, Safety Committee.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. There's a number of things to get through. You recall from last month's meeting, we had a conversation about police wages, the police budget, and that was a bit premature, and I said in my notes to you, my note on Friday night, it was a bit premature. We haven't yet had a chance to review and plan the committee and with the budget and last year's and in consideration. So we've gone back and done that. You have in front of you Michael Boucher's, I believe is president.
Yes.
Correct.
Michael Boucher's plan, which the assumptions are, as I said in my note to you, that we worked from last year's actual spend and did a plan based on that. Now, the budget is, so that plan and what we're looking for approval around, or at least discussion for an amendment and then approval around, is the 11,056, 500 hours, 502 hours, at an average compensation of 22 an hour. If you recall, we approved the job share between Michael and Ben Colco, and then that's where you get the kind of average compensation there over that plan. Now, a couple more things before I open for discussion. That's a 40-hour week during peak season. It begins gradually and ends, it tapers off. It tapers up and tapers on. You have in front of you the spreadsheet that Michael has done, that the safety committee has reviewed, and it calls out the green and variables, green and yellow gauge, et cetera. And the budget is $7,500. That's what is in the budget. So we are looking at last year's spend, which was $10,740, and this year we're projecting at 11 and change, as I said. So that would require, I talked to Steve about this week, when we had a full discussion, obviously dipping into the contingency fund. And so I open it to discussion for input and clarification. Michael's prepared to clarify any of his notes, et cetera, but we first have the board discussion.
Well, Michael is here. Thank you very much, Michael, for that introduction. And we have the 6 overseers here. I see Judy has her hand up. Judy?
First, Michael, I want to tell you that your communications on Friday night were a model of perfection. They were exactly what I would love all of us to learn to do. And that give us the information, encourage us to read it critically, and then save our questions to the meeting. That was perfect. Secondly, I think that I guess I'll make a motion to approve this modified budget to the $11,556, which involves us going into the contingency fund by about $780, based over what we did last year, and so that I can make them.
No, not really.
Okay, so I guess I misunderstood.
Well, so you're correct in comparing year-to-year budgets, but we're going to go into the contingency fund for $4,000 plus 30% more for payroll taxes, workers' compensation insurance, and all those related expenses.
All right, so I withdraw my motion because I misread that.
Because this is
We
pre.
have budgeted 7,000 and something, although last year we spent 10.
Yeah, so there's 7,500 that's been budgeted, and within multiple other accounts are the corresponding increases for payroll taxes and things like that. So when you look at additions, it is going to be not just the wage addition, but the wage addition plus 30% of those wages. Those won't go direct to the budget line for police. They get interspersed with all those other, expense lines.
So that makes the budget more than 7,500. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the budget wouldn't change. But what we do is say of the $19,000 we have in contingency, we see a good reason to go take some additional money to support the police.
Right.
So we're going to take that out of contingency because that's where we have the money. And that number is probably going to be about $5,000.
So that's really the motion that I should be making, is to take out of contingency 4,500. That's what I should be saying.
Yeah.
Okay, I move to get discussion started, that we authorize the fine, that up to 5,000 be removed from contingency fund to support the police operations that have been proposed by the safety committee.
Second?
I said.
Vicky, second. Discussion. Vic, Lee.
I would hope because I'm not a big fan of increasing costs, and I see the police basically trying to feather their nest and increase the costs, and it might go on year after year, and I'm against that. Not because I'm against police per se, but I see this as a self-perpetuating, all-encompassing, tell us, well, you've got to be safe. What do we have county sheriffs patrol? Why do we have state police? You're not the only one that's
policing this place, and I don't want to pay beyond what I can afford. And I hope the rest of the board feels the same way.
Vicki?
I want to commend our police officer, chief. I thought this was a really excellent report with excellent validations for your requests. And as I read this, I thought, you know, you're the expert, okay? I have anecdotal experience with policemen and officers, and even though I work at the Maine State Prison, I have learned to respect that you have knowledge, experience, and education that I don't in these areas. And so that whole gradually going in, I've changed my first thought from what I thought last month when you first proposed it. So I am more than willing to support this and try it and see what the results are with this. And I think a slow introduction might be an easy way of eliminating some of the controversy that I have heard come here in July and August and September. And so I think it's good, and I think it's worth a try. And I think we have experts so that we can listen to them. You are our current expert.
If I might just to address Lee's concern, is all I'm trying to do is bring this to an actual cost, and then we maintain that actual cost. I don't want to see us continually adding more and more funds beyond reasonable small increases because of inflation and
Tell
other
me that
cost
in 5
issues.
years.
Dave, they're going to be here in 5 years.
I respect that, and what I do now on a daily basis is I'm the treasurer of Hancock County. So I really respect cost, and I want to see the best benefit for the village for the price that they're paying for it.
Judy?
I think that Lee makes an excellent point about how all of us are paying tax dollars to the town of Northport as well as to the village, and that as a consequence, because we have committed to safety, we're giving the Waldo County Sheriff's Office a buy. And I think it is essential that as part of this commitment to spending more money is that we have an affirmative process whereby we get the Waldo County Sheriff's Office to recognize that there is a concentration of 240 homes here that deserve coverage. And we need to ask them how they're going to support us and remind them that they have to. It's been very easy for Waldo County to say, don't you have a cop? And we say, yeah. And it's particularly in the winter, you guys who are here year-round, who complain routinely about the speeding, you deserve to have that cop sitting there watching the speed in January as well as in July. So I think we need to take control of that. Doesn't mean they're going to give us money, doesn't mean they're going to give us coverage, but we pay an awful lot of money to the town of Northport, and a huge piece of that budget is county.
Michael? Mike Kleiner?
I think I read through that, and I think it looks great. My concern is this year. I think that's a great proposal when we're talking about next year's budget. My concern is that it's so much more than what we had budgeted. And I'm not saying, and I know this is going to drive Michael nuts because he's saying, well, you're sticking to a budget that we never really thought was real to begin with. But that said, I'm wondering if there's a way that we could do this where we approve it to a certain time of the year, and then we approve the rest of it, so that we can make sure that it's happening, and because we're pulling out a contingency, then we could do the rest of it. Is there a way to do that as a possibility? That's just a discussion item, okay?
I have my hand up, if I could jump in for a second. Just to clarify, I heard comments about try this, et cetera, and I think it's, these are all very excellent input, by the way. But just to clarify, this is not, this is basically doing what we did last year, and we were really, I apologize for those words, but this is not, the budget is reduction, of course, and that's, a pain point, of course. But last year, as we have, we spent almost $11,000 last year. We spent $10,740. So the difference this year is that we're doing it with our eyes wide open. If you ask Steve, he will say that we had an on-and-on moment last August, and all of a sudden there was a giant surprise in the spending. And so it required a course correction and just contingency. We have the contingency there for a reason. It's already allocated. Obviously, it needs to be spread out over a number of competing interests and needs. But just to clarify, this is a number that's pretty close to last year.
What was the year before?
Judy?
Oh, well, I think that the lease doesn't, well, I think that, last year's police presence created a sense of expectation among our residents. I think we got good return for those almost $11,000 that we spent last year. I think if we now said, oops, we didn't realize we were spending $11,000 last year, we would then have to explain to our residents that although speeding's important, we're rolling back our coverage by 20%, 30%, and that's not what they want. They want from us the speeding and the safety of our children. So unfortunately, because I'll take responsibility as the finance committee, didn't really realize what we were actually spending. I think we've already committed to spend this $11,000.
Jeffrey?
Well, I think another point we need to take into account is it possible that the budget number was never reasonable for what we want to accomplish? And it puts the safety committee in an awkward position to be tasked with coming up with a concept and a plan for policing that by necessity has to be tied to a budget number that no one really understands where it came from and was it ever reasonable.
Steve?
If you'd like some perspective,
Yeah.
which I think would be helpful. So for many years, we had a police presence that was paid an hourly rate of probably $15 an hour, perhaps $17 an hour, which worked just fine. The coverage was spotty at best. We had a number of officers who I think we all looked at and said, we're not going to do this again. So to your point, we had something that when you looked at the budget, the money was sufficient for what we did, but we never got to where we wanted to be. So in the last year in particular, I think was the first time I've actually seen meaningful speed enforcement and those sorts of things. And there was a cost associated with that. We didn't budget well, we didn't know. We increased the wages because finding police officers in the state of Maine has become very difficult. So there are some environmental things that took place that make it very difficult to what we had done back in 2016 and 17 that you can't replicate today, just a fact of life. So that's the history behind it. What I would say when you think about contingency is we have about $19,000. That $19,000 is sort of a rainy day fund to do whatever the overseers decide is appropriate for the village. I recommend we keep $5,000 aside for the things you just don't see coming. That leaves you $14,000. So if you think that taking $5,000 out of contingency to support what, in my opinion, was a good spend last year, and that I hear some people saying, we'd like to do it, how do we make it happen? That still leaves you with, $14,000 in total in contingencies to address whatever else you may have, whether it's safety at the basketball court, additional tree planting, some infrastructure work on the roads that weren't budgeted. The only difference is we are tighter in that contingency fund than we've been in past years. So we used to be able to just really go do anything and have money left over. That I don't think will be the case this year. So,
Judy?
I want to, again, bounce off of what Lee said. I don't want this to be an invitation to creating a police state. Love you like crazy. Prefer that we didn't have them. I don't want any tasers. I don't, even if we get them for free, so your grant writing piece of this is a good piece, but don't go out there and use that as an excuse to build our police presence.
Yes, right.
I'm very comfortable with our police presence, particularly because you embody it. But I love the days when it was Bill Page and Al Keith who told me what to do. Those are the days I want to be back.
I don't want this to be a self-perpetuating police department, which with ever-increasing budgets, period.
Right.
Michael Boucher?
Yes, and the point I want to make is that I'm trying to craft this to what the village wants. total.
I can't hear.
Sorry, I'm trying to craft the police department and the budget to what the village wants total with your guidance. And it's really like I've had to start from scratch. And we did. And I think we've done a very good job at doing that, in creating a mission and a goal that fits the attitude of the community that's here and that I actually have come to care about a lot. So I want to continue doing that. And as for the sheriff's department and the patrol issues of the sheriff's department, this is not the only town with that issue. Because the state police and the sheriff's departments, when they cover a zone, they can cover up to 8 to 10 towns at once. So that's an issue that will never go away. And if the community wants more targeted enforcement, it's reality that it has to be paid for. And I think this is a very good thing and a very great service to the community because of the amount of people that move in here and the amount of people that are consolidated in one small area for a specific period of time.
Mike Lanner?
So, relative to budgeting for next year, and I'll get to why that's important right now, right? The timeline would be, what, Steve?
Well, at the next meeting, the safety committee has been asked to present a tentative budget for 2020.
Right, okay.
And then that would be approved by the overseers in June at their meeting.
Right.
And then presented to the voters in August at the annual meeting.
Right, okay. So, relative to that, I mean, I think everybody's sort of giving you budgets for that right now. And I think in that process, we find out what we really need that we didn't budget for this year. So, you know, I would propose that we either put it off a month or do some of it now and then some of it after we kind of set our 2020 budgets, because I think things are gonna come out of the woodwork that we may need contingencies for. And I just want to make sure that we have that covered in the next month or two. And then to me, it'll be very clear, I think, some of the stuff that like, for example, when Billy indicated the roads really know. There's been a lot of extra potholes this year just because of the kind of winter we had. So those kind of things and others, I just want to make sure we're looking at everything together. Now, that said, the plan is a good one, and I don't want to take away from it. I just don't want to I don't want to make it so tight that we can't do some of the other things that we're looking at doing.
Yeah, well, I understand, and I certainly could support that, look, we're going to fund July, but you're going to have to make a decision on whether you fund August. So let's say you say, we'll approve 2,500 of that now, then we're going to revisit this a couple months down the road and perhaps approve the extra 2,500. That's the sort of approach you're talking
But
about.
I'm not saying that, I think I agree with Judy when she said, you know, this is what we did last year, so it doesn't need to be a pilot program, okay? It's not a pilot program, it's let's approve the 2,500 now, and I think in my mind with the intent to approve the others, but then let's wait and see what other things we think might be in contingency, because usually by the time summer starts, we know a lot of our contingency between then and what's going to happen in August.
Lee?
I think you're going to find that you're going to wipe out your contingency, because I think once you start looking at the roads, it's going to be a whole lot worse than anybody even thinks of right now. And you know, and I know, that roads cost a lot of money to repair. So if you start tightening up, spending more on what you think is safety, if the roads are real bad, it won't make much difference.
Jeffrey?
So, Mike, are you
I have
saying?
my hand up as well, so.
Okay.
These are my
All right, Michael, you go first then.
Go ahead, Michael.
I just, no, I'm going to Jeffrey.
Well, my question is, so Mike Lannon, are you saying you think by the April overseers meeting, we'll have a better sense of what other contingency funding we might have vis-a-vis the roads, vis-a-vis, I mean, is your point that if we don't make this decision today, but instead wait and make the decision April the 28th, we'll have better information?
No, I'm not, I don't think it's April 28th. I think it's more like when we get to May and June. So that's why I'm saying we fund now up through July, and then way before we ever get to August, we do the other part. And that way we just know that we're okay with everything else we need to do. Because if something were to happen and there was a storm, you know, in the springtime here, it doesn't seem like we should be using up all of our contingencies That's all I'm saying.
Michael Terrell, now you.
Well, we're not using up all the contingency. Steve, what would be left if we took what's required here out of the contingency?
Well, with a caveat I'll talk about in a minute, about $14,000.
But does that include the fines that you hold for emergency?
No. So if you take that out,
It's
you
nine.
have, well, you're down to 9,000.
So it's really nine.
And is there anything else, Steve, you want to add to that?
Well, so, Michael, do you want to continue? Because I have some things just to talk about in general to Mike Lannon's concerns.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so contingent, I agree wholeheartedly that, you know, I would not spend any contingency till December 1st, and then I'd be very happy. But we can't do that, right? So that's the way it goes. What we have done for the past several years is focus on infrastructure to prevent using contingency, because we always had to, because we let things go so far they broke. So just for some reference points, road maintenance has always been $9,000 a year. We have $16,800 budgeted. Now that's doing a major road construction somewhere, I don't remember exactly what the detail is. Trees that had been about $2,000 a year are $8,500 this year. So we've put some big chunks of change, big chunks of change into some areas which we identified in advance. Wharves, which we've always had to suck money out of contingencies because we never budgeted enough, are budgeted at about $11,000, which is what we spent. So we finally got that right. I am less concerned about the need to draw a lot of contingencies, and frankly, with road work, and they are expensive to maintain, but if we had to do what I would call catastrophic gravel road repair, we're talking $5 grand. Does that sound about right? I mean, it's money and it's expensive, but it's not as disastrous as I might have thought when I started this. So you have flexibility. I think the key is discipline. So my wet blanket thing is, if you want to look at the safety budget right now, we're $500 overspent before we start the season because we had radio repairs that weren't expected, to the tune of $500. We now have 2 police officers, which doubles uniform costs, which aren't budgeted at a particularly high level. And so I think there are some things we have to take a look at and say, before we spend it, you know, we need to make sure it's it, because that's tip of the iceberg stuff. So the $5,000 for wages isn't the only place you're going to be overspent in the safety budget.
Well, like, what about, for example, the safety ladders that we were going to put on the floats and stuff? Is that coming out of contingency? Or?
That would, the community hall cleaning we talked about, because it's going to be much more expensive, will come out of there. The basketball court, if that's deemed as an important project by the overseers, that will come out of contingencies. But those are the only things I know of right now. Now, there may be some things the rest of you have thought about that I haven't seen yet.
Just a moment, Judy?
Well, I just to piggyback off of what Steve said, we have often looked to the contingency budget to deal with these extra items because we weren't as disciplined and clear in all our individual line items.
Right.
We are much more disciplined, thanks to Steve, so we already have fat in those.
Right.
Where we dropped that ball was on safety. We didn't recognize that our budget wasn't matching reality. So I think that I'm going to vote for the motion because I think that the nibbling around the edges isn't going to change the result. We want to have the cops at this level of coverage this summer, and that's how much it costs.
Michael Boucher?
May I make just
Please.
a couple final comments? So in regards to other expenses, which, by the way, the radio was, I was quoted when I originally talked to them, much lower than that. I'm very shocked at the price myself. But that's one of the most important features of the car to have working properly, at least for me in a safety perspective. But for uniforms, I mean, that section was unrealistic, so Ben and I have bought our uniforms out of our own pocket, and we won't be asking the village to reimburse that cost. And for other unknown expenses, fuel costs, that's dependent on the price of gasoline, and then vehicle repair costs, which I don't presume there's going to be any because the cruiser is actually in very, very good shape. So my one concern to the $11,000 is those unknowns, which we're obviously going to try to keep completely as low as possible this year. We're not building an office. I actually have received a computer that was donated by the Hancock County Sheriff's Department. I've looked for other ways to get older equipment donated for free so that we don't actually increase the budget. And then, yeah, and so for example, how unrealistic one of the line items is actually training costs. So training costs was set at $60. Well, the actual fees for the training are $75. Times 2 officers, $150. And we'll do that training over the course of the summer, so we're actually working piecemealing because it's online. But those are the things that next year's budget I would like to see actually reflect the actual cost, so that there's no surprise to the village and we won't have to dip out of contingency funds unless there's an actual problem that arises. And then with the cruiser fund, how much money is in the actual cruiser fund?
I can't tell you off the top of my head.
Because one of my thoughts that I have is if we're thinking about rolling that into the actual contingencies or actual reserves next year.
Well, different things.
It's just, yeah.
The general fund.
Right.
It's untouchable.
Yeah.
Right, so it's marked untouchable only for cruiser replacement. Okay, and I guess that was my question, because if it's marked untouchable, we can't really do anything with it, because I was gonna say, if, I don't know, cruiser repair costs or something came up, we could remove from that fund, but if we can't, we can't.
Steve, you had,
Well, a bunch of things, and I don't disagree with anything you presented. However, our budget this year is our budget this year.
Correct.
So we could do a lot of good things to make sure next year is correct. For now, that frankly doesn't matter at all.
Yes.
Right? One of the things that I always am doing is figuring out how we're gonna bail ourselves out if we really, really miss something badly. The road reconstruction will take place in the fall, if it takes place at all. And if something were to really fall apart, say the wharf, there's really significant damage there we didn't expect, we would defer the road replacement, that's all. So we always have some places we can go and say, as much as we'd like to do this project, that was our intent, we can back it down if it becomes critical to do so. That's one option out. The other option is, if we see ourselves going sideways by the time of the annual meeting, we can ask to draw from reserves, and if the voters approve drawing from reserves, we could get some more money. I have protected those reserves ferociously for a long time. So I'm telling you that's a hard sell, but if it was the right thing to do for the village, and that's what the overseers wanted to do, and I couldn't convince you to leave it alone, and you could convince the the voters to give you money, you've got more money. So the main thing though is, you can't look at this. I mean, the simplest way to look at it is, once you spend $1, it's gone. And I think if you could live within your budget and make things go, it's a beautiful thing.
any other commentary?
Don't let me say anything else, because I'll always have.
Yeah, because you also argue both sides of that
I
issue
do.
so
Well,
effectively.
you have a couple choices.
Michael Terrell, this is John Spritz, and I just want to say that this has been an elucidating conversation around the table. I really appreciate having it. Whatever decision is made now, I think it'd be important that moving forward, we build the full cost of the safety committee's expenses for the police force up front and not rely on any kind of dipping into contingency fund or reserves going forward. We should know and we should budget for that in future years. I think that the contingency fund is there for emergencies, essentially. Contingencies we did not expect, not to take care of an issue or to make sure that a budget works out. Mr. Ryan?
In Michael's defense, he didn't put the budget together for this, so.
Oh, yeah.
I agree, I understand. I'm talking about future years.
No, I'm just saying, let's
Years
just
to
look
come.
at it. I think he knows that. so.
Right. Steve?
And then,
I'm sorry, but I do have one more.
Please.
So, let's say we correct the 2020 budget, and everything else is equal, that means your contingency fund next year is going to be $14,000. So we're always going to be reducing the unallocated funds we have to bail us out. That's not a bad thing, but we don't think about doing the correct job of budgeting police and still having $19,000 in contingency.
along those lines, we did change the tax rate this year, so that could have been considered in that calculation.
Yes, we did.
Right.
We increased
If
taxes.
there was this.
That is
Increased
correct.
taxes.
So it wasn't like it was 1-to-1 in dollars. So it wasn't just taking from this pot and putting it there.
Yeah, but you made.
I don't want to go water under the bridge. Let's move on. I just have
Why don't
one
we
more
move
question.
There is a motion on the
I
table.
had one more
Move the
question.
previous question.
There is a motion on the table, which is to approve the recommendations of the safety committee in terms of the budget, completely with the understanding that up to $5,000 be drawn from contingency funds if necessary.
One more question, just what was the budget last year versus this year? Just those two questions.
For wages,
Yeah,
6,500
Total
for
the total.
wages, 6,500 for wages in 2018, and it was increased by the overseers to 7,500 for 2019.
okay. That was the budgets.
Yep.
And then the actual versus this budget?
The actual for 17 was about 6,500. And the overseers knew they want to spend more money, so the actual for 18 was like 10,556 or 10,756.
So 10,740.
Right.
10,740 versus now with the 5,000.
11,500.
11,500. Okay.
Something like that.
Okay?
All right, that's all I was asking. Yeah.
There's still a motion on the table. Judy?
I'm ready to vote.
The motion, again, I'll repeat, is to accept the recommendations of the Safety Committee with the understanding that up to $5,000 can be withdrawn from contingency to cover the differential, essentially, between their recommendations and what is in the budget. All in favor? One, two.
Aye.
Michael's an aye. Opposed? So that is 5 in favor, 2 opposed. Thank you. Anything else, Michael?
I do, yes. We have a motion to hire the 2 lifeguards that were discussed at the last meeting. I realized at the end of the meeting we moved ask on that. We have one for lifeguard training. And I apologize, I don't have the hourly. I think it's the same hourly as last. Steve, do you remember what that hourly rate was?
I don't have that with me, Michael, I'm
Sorry to
sorry.
put you on the spot. But anyway, we need to approve their hire.
I move that the 2 returning lifeguards be hired on the same terms that they were employed last year.
Second.
Second by Lee. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? And I so.
Aye.
Right, it's unanimous. Keep going.
The next item is that you recall that we discussed the mission statement and reviewing the mission statement with the committee. I don't know that that requires any board action, but if I could get a clarification on that. We discussed it, we didn't act on it. I don't know that we need to act on it. Judy, your perspective?
My perspective is that you don't need action on it. I think it showed great discipline to adopt one, but there's no requirement that you adopt one.
Not every committee has mission statements. Great you guys have one. Exactly.
So we're proceeding with that mission statement, and if you recall, I postulated a few hypotheticals where that statement, where that how the mission defines safety committee and what it is and isn't doing. And one of them is the management of the lifeguards and the who they report to. One of the things that's the key here that Ben also brought up at our safety committee meeting was, and this is why it's good to have experts versus committee members who are consultants as well, but they're not experts. If lifeguards aren't on duty, here's the thing, just a hypothetical issue, then this idea of who's the first responder, and then the first responder then becomes the police, so they need to know that. So we need to have this clear around who's managing their day-to-day, who they're reporting to, who they check in with, that they're going to be in, who do they call in sick to, and all that. So I just leave that for discussion now.
My view is that we have been leaning on Beanie so hard to be the person who does that probably inappropriately. I think that the lifeguards should call into the office, speak to Billy if they, or leave a message with the village agent that they're not going to show up, and then it's Billy's job to tell the cops that there's unexpected absence of coverage. He's the manager, he's the village agent. He should be the one that they speak to, my view.
I agree with that. I agree with it.
There's agreement around the table recognizing there may be times when not all these people are immediately available to take those phone calls to pass the information along.
Well, he checks his messages regularly, though.
He's essentially on call with the water and sewer, so if it's an emergency, you can get a hold of Billy.
I think they'll call the office and they'll say, can I speak with Billy? If Billy's not there, Mandy will certainly pass it along if she's there. Billy checks his messages every day.
Right.
Michael Boucher?
I just want to add one point, is maybe we just put in there as well, if they can't get a hold of anybody and they have to leave for an emergent reason, or whatever, they do call the police officer that's working, if there happens to be a police
If
officer.
there happens to be.
Not hearing so well.
Michael's suggesting that if the efforts to get in touch with the village agent fail abjectly, then the police department should be contacted. Of course, the police department's only here 40 hours a week,
Correct.
so, so that should be the fallback. But the primary responsibility should be the village agent. And the village agent's saying, I don't think so.
Village agent, what's your comment?
The only thing I was thinking, just listening, is if you have a lifeguard that leaves off duty, you know, for emergency or whatever they have to leave, their normal time is, and they can't get a hold of me like they're supposed to, or whatever, and they can't, supposedly they're not on,
Right.
you know, then if there's an emergency, you're supposed to dial 911. Let the dispatch center decide whether you need an ambulance for the fire department, whether you need police department or whatever. That's what 911's about.
Well, right.
So why are we trying to micromanage that so hard?
Yeah, I don't think that that's the situation that Michael's creating as the hypothetical. I think it's the example of, oh, the lifeguard has the flu, he's not gonna be in today. Who does he call? In the old days, he would have called Beanie. We're trying to get our volunteers out of that story. So if there is a volunteer, if he can't come to work like he's supposed to, he has to tell his boss, and that's the village agent. That will also introduce some maturity to that, because you always like to not tell the boss.
What's the significance of that with respect to safety? Like, there's nothing we're gonna do different, like, we're not gonna call somebody else in, right?
Or we could call the other kid who's gonna cover, you know, we could say, oh, can you be
Is
there?
that the
But
intent,
that would be the situation, is he would decide, well, who cares?
For scheduling purposes, I think that's the village agent, but for the law enforcement end, if we're working, which on weekends, I mean, the schedule shows that most weekends are covered, that we would pay more attention to the dock and the park in that case. We'd make it a more of a focus so that we could regulate more what was going on down there, so it just didn't become a free-for-all and somebody gets hurt.
Right, but for the emergency situation, Billy, someone jumps off the dock into the propeller of a boat, yeah, 911 is the first person you call.
Yeah.
I mean, no one's suggesting that you bypass emergency services.
But if a lifeguard's not on duty, they're not supposed to have the lifeguard sign up.
Right.
That's
Right.
something that our police department should be checking
Right.
all the time. Is that sign up, is it down?
Right.
That tells them whether there's a lifeguard on duty or not on duty.
Right, and I
So
think
if
that's
they're sick,
part
it's
of your
not on
normal
duty.
patrolling in any event.
It
You
is.
just make sure things are where they're supposed to be.
So, Michael, I think that you just need for the lifeguards to just write that out and make sure they understand it, which is that if they cannot be on their appointed task, if they're not there, and/or if they have to leave early for some reason, they contact Billy, and it moves on from there.
Okay, and so how the communicator comes from the village agent and office manager to the new hires?
If you're going to let them know that they have been officially approved, if you could also tell them that rule, that if there was ever an issue that they can't show up at work when they're supposed to, let Billy know, and then Billy's sort of in charge. Or otherwise, we can just make sure Billy lets them when he meets them, you know, hey, that's great.
Well, Billy's the one they report to, they should be informed of that.
But I think it's easy peasy to just let them know now, and by the way, you used to report to Beanie, you're not reporting to Beanie anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, got it, okay, got it, great.
Mike
Sorry, but someone,
Mike Lennon has his hand up.
so I think, again, when I'm thinking about this from the safety perspective, is there something else that maybe we need to post? Because people expect that they sent their kids down there with a lifeguard. So is there another sign, instead of no lifeguard on duty, we have lifeguard is off today, so that it's clear?
Like,
You don't wanna do
no
that?
lifeguard is as clear as we
That's just, at other places I've been to, other docks, that's more than sufficient. There are many docks where there's no
Just ask a
communication.
question.
take the
No,
bubble wrap off.
I think we're fine.
I'm just asking.
I know, I appreciate it.
Babysitting services not today.
Michael Terrell, keep going.
But I think that's probably
so
part of
can
the
we
problem.
just have a continuous discussion for full clarification about who the police department reports to, and how that carries on once we get underway.
Same thing.
As we discussed, I think last time, and I think it's great for Michael and, I'm sorry, Ben, to hear directly, my view is that the village agent is the boss. Certainly, the village agent is going to want to know that we have his back, and the cops are going to want to know that if they're at loggerheads with the village agent, they have a resource, which is us. But the village agent is the boss.
I agree
in my
with
view.
Judy.
Vicki?
I agree with Judy also, and we have talked about this, and I've thought about this, and Michael, I understand you have other options that down the road you might want us to look at. I think we've talked about this. Bill Page is our only full-time employee. He's the one that has management. We're empowering with management duties, and as Judy said, to back him and empower him. And in this conversation, I would just like to add that if anybody, especially the overseers, have any complaints, the first thing is to support Bill. If there's a complaint, bring it to the appropriate place, because it's really important that we support Bill with his decisions. In my experience with working with Bill, I just want to say that I think his feet are firmly on the ground. He understands what these employees should be doing. And although we might have different opinions and different ways of handling things, I think it is just really important that he knows he has our support. Because I know we all sometimes walk on eggshells so we don't offend our residents and our friends that live here.
I think we covered all of this. I think we covered all of this last meeting.
I think the idea that the police department reports to the village agent on and police report it for the month bill. That's clear. I wonder if we can.
Hold on.
Right, there's a question, Michael, there's a,
Hold on 1 second. Lee has something to add.
We spent an awful lot of time last meeting on this, and we're just rehashing what we've already decided.
Keep going, Michael.
Fully decided, I think the clarification is important. But if we could shift, this is all part of a piece. What I was looking to do is have it be very clear in this presentation about the lifeguard that's approved, and the police department has disapproved, which happens today. And now if we can shift to the complaint process, which is all part of this, then to have this done clearer. So if we can shift now to the complaint form the public safety form I sent through on Friday night for discussion, and I'm asking the board to, I believe this should be approved, and we should have a discussion about how this needs to work as a process. So 2 levels of discussion. One is input into the form itself, and the second part of the discussion is the process for handling these complaints, or suggestions, or the processing of that form. So this is a very big piece of the 3 parts that we're talking about here: police, lifeguards, and input from residents, managing all 3.
Vicki's going to be recognizing herself as the chair of the board in the absence of John.
I think it's very timely. The only thing I would say is to take a broader look at the complaint form. And I would suggest that anybody, any village person or visitor or whatever, has a complaint, instead of coming in and lashing out at the people who happen to be in the office, as I've heard recently has happened, and I find extremely distasteful, that somebody be able to hand them a form that says, please write your complaint down, and if you want to have on there, this complaint concerns the wharf, the police officer, or just a complaint about, something else, designate that, but have one form. They can be instructed to come to the office, fill out the form with a signature, and go from there. Your form is specific. Right, yeah, your form is, I found your form to be specific to police and lifeguards. I would be in favor of a form that encompasses any village complaint that wants to be processed.
Judy?
I loved your form. I think I had the thought as broadly as Vicki. I think it would be fine to, if you add community comments as to anything. A pothole is a safety issue, for instance, and I know Michael doesn't want to have responsibility for that, but it would be great to put it down. What I think would be a helpful addition to this is a statement at the bottom as to when the complainant can expect to have a response. I think everyone who complains deserves a response, but it should say this will be reviewed at the next overseers meeting or next safety committee meeting, or something that lets them know that it's not landing in the waste barrel the minute they write it.
Mike Lannon?
Can we be more positive and call it suggestions instead of complaints?
I can't hear you.
Mike Lannon is saying, should you call it suggestions instead of complaints?
And I don't think so.
It doesn't say complaints, actually. If you look at the form, I'm using the term complaint, of course, we've mentioned it here, but it doesn't say that. It's a safety concern and or a suggestion.
Yeah, that's good.
And
Okay, I
I
like
don't
that.
have a public safety form on purpose, because it's specific to safety-related issues.
Michael Boucher has a comment.
So this is the first time I'm hearing about this, but yeah, I think it's a very good idea to be general, but with very, very specific law enforcement related complaints, which would lead possibly to what we call IA, internal investigations. Last summer, this was a major concern for me, and I had spoken with the sheriff actually, and they agreed to cover those sorts of complaints to be an independent body in case there's actual, they believe, somebody believes the police officer acted inappropriately or did something illegal, and it was validated that the sheriff's department would handle that, and they gave me a form to supply for that type of issue, to give to them.
Judy?
Sorry. Well, that's really helpful, Michael, and I had made an assumption that you had participated in creating this. I agree that if it's a personnel complaint versus a safety complaint, then there's a different channel because you're talking about employees. I don't agree that if it were about employees, it's a carve-out that only the sheriff's department looks at. I think the overseers need input in that as well. So maybe, maybe Michael, you can get a sample IA complaint, if there's such a form, to the safety committee, and maybe they can marry those two things together or decide if we need to have two things. But I would think if our employees are being complained about,
We want to know that.
we want to know about it.
Vicki?
As a,
Can I just insert there, it might be obviously very important. The distinction is, I think, critical, and what we're looking to do with this form specifically is, it has nothing to do with personnel. Our intent here is to, the kinds of things that get raised, meetings, this, that, or that people have a suggestion, we kind of channel that and keep it limited to them.
Got it. Vicki?
as a point in protocol and procedure, I think that if a person has an issue, and we'll use you as an example, okay? And says, I don't like the color of your shoes. And so they come in and they say, I don't like it, and they fill out the form and they sign their name. I don't think any complaint without a signature is valid, and really important if you're going to complain, you own it. And then the safety, and then it says, oops, they're talking about our cop. And so we're going to give this to the safety committee to deal with. And the safety committee deals with if it needs further jurisdiction, okay? Okay, or comes here and we say, no, Mike Terrell, this is safety committee, we want you to deal with it, and then the safety committee takes it to that next level to protect you. We are also here to protect you.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Okay, so as a point of policy and procedure for the village, okay?
Mike
I
Lannon?
think the assumption was that we would have a process to this form.
Right.
The assumption of the committee was that we would have a process with this form in process from submission by village agent, and then it's designated from there who handles it.
Got it.
But obvious, the majority of something like this is that the overseers have transparency into this process and to what's being talked about and it's documented versus the random nature of hearing about things.
Good. Judy?
I think the flip side of that, however, is if it is a personnel complaint, we have to also consider the personnel confidentiality issues. But I think getting the form right is the first step, and then if we find that it's something that should be dealt with in executive session, then so be it.
I mean, would that be as simple as this form as to say this is again, it's not be forward, but just be very clear that this is not, does not include personnel related issues, that that's a separate problem.
Right, so maybe we need a separate personnel.
No.
Vicki?
We keep it simple, stupid, okay? Keep it simple. One form to be overseen, and what I would recommend is that perhaps, okay, you gave us the form, and we're all on board for that, because it keeps a record of things, and then maybe next month you could come up with what you see as the protocol for this form, and break it, you know, where it goes after the form is filled out. Would that be a possibility for shortening this conversation?
So how does what Michael's saying fit into what Billy looks at? How does that, I just
I can't hear you.
How does Billy become part of this process is what was being asked.
So,
Well, I think that's what we're looking to talk about.
Yeah,
So
I actually would
it's not
prefer that if there's going to be protocol issues discussed and are figured out, that we push that to the May meeting. I understand the summer's coming, but April is going to be a packed day, and I'd rather take this item and move it off of the April agenda if possible.
Yeah, and have it nicely tightened up, and again, it can always be tweaked. We just need something to vote on.
so in just my final comment as the police officer is
I
that
can't hear you.
Michael
Sorry.
Boucher speaking.
normally people can hear me, sorry. So just my final comment as the police officer, I really feel like we have two separate procedures or two separate forms, because we have form number 1, which is a general complaint. Bill could receive that, look at it, and say this isn't valid, or talk to the person about what happened, even if it was a personnel issue. But then if it had to go to the next stage, we would have a separate process for that next stage. And I think that we can have that discussion as the safety committee and really iron this out and make it work before any issue arises over the summer, and that's what I would like to see personally.
So,
Again, though, I just want to be clear so I understand it, and also that the intent here is understood. These issues are important. What we're looking to do, though, is a specific form for concerns, suggestions around safety and around the issues involved in safety. That is not personnel, and it's not other things related to the community. While that might be, those things might be valid, the safety committee is looking to get out of the business of having people storm up on porches or storm into offices, raising Cain about something that's going on around safety. The idea would be to be able to direct whoever's upset or whoever's happy with a suggestion to go along and have out this form, and then submit it, and then the process unfolds from there.
Yeah.
It's really kind of simple, and I'm not trying to be overly simplistic.
good.
No, I think that's a good clarification too.
It can be one form, and somebody checks off, I see this as a safety issue versus this is a, versus an issue about my trash pickup or something like that people complain about. And I want to say, it's not in my thought that I anticipate that we get a complaint that says, I don't like the color of the police officer's shoes, and we take that to Bill, and then Bill talks to you. Bill is your person you respond to say, I'm going to be here, I'm going to not be here, this needs to be done, how do you think I should handle it? The complaints go through the overseers.
So I guess where my concern is from my experience in law enforcement, is that if a police officer is actively doing their job, and it doesn't matter how nice they are, and there's going to be complaints that roll in, and I'd rather get ahead of the issue. And I think we are talking about two separate things, and they just got lumped together. So I like the clarification that this is a general suggestion issue with this one. But before the season starts, I would like to see us have a process, so that in case somebody makes a complaint, which, like I said, if we're doing our job, it's likely somebody will, even in the moment, they might be angry at that moment, and then it's addressed properly.
Okay, Jeffrey?
Yes, and be very careful. Michael, thank you for those comments, and this is not that. So let's be clear that we're asking to clarify and have consensus around what this is, not what that is.
Right.
Which is very important.
Got it.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Jeffrey?
I was gonna say that.
Okay. Anything else, Michael? Do we need, you have a form sitting out there you're gonna make some corrections to or changes to, it sounds like, edits? No?
I think the only edited suggestion was Vicky's to maybe broaden it to beyond
One form.
to include, public comment on anything. Potholes was my example, but maybe it's broad enough that we don't even need to make that clarification.
I think we should roll it out as is and see what happens. See how it's used before we start broadening it. Okay.
I'm confused about broadening anyway. I understood the comments, I just don't understand the context or the meaning, because in the sense of what we're talking about here is public safety forum. Broadening it to other things in the community seems to water down the process or make it less focused, less actionable.
Agreed. Anything else, Michael?
Not on that, so I guess, what's the direction to, because I'm looking for input on this form. We've had a nice discussion about how the forms work, and maybe some input into the form, but I think the form is the form. The committee has come forward with this form.
I don't have any recommended changes on it.
So could you, for our next meeting in advance, or the May meeting, just give us an idea of how you'd like to roll this out? Should there be a stack sitting in the office, plus you want Dan to put it online, plus XXX? Just give us a sense of protocol or how you want to do it.
Well, roll it out, but protocol is what do we do after it's filled out?
And when it's
That's the
filled out,
important.
right. What-
Right, so we got the form, now we need to know where it's going to go from there.
Right,
Know what that looks like.
so I had suggested that there be a response deadline, that we say that they'll hear from us after the next overseers meeting, or they'll hear from us by X, so they know that their complaint is being listened to.
Okay, so we'll take it back to committee and refine it further and come back to you.
Perfect.
Which means they need an email address, or is that on there?
One last thing for safety, two last things actually. The safety committee is looking at a safety day, which we did last year. We may do it in an amended form this year and not make it, change it a bit, and maybe even build some kind of game-like participation into it for kids so that they go through a series of steps to learn about an ambulance or whatever it is, in order to earn something along the way. What we experienced last year is we put out free hot dogs. People came along with free hot dogs and wandered off. So we're going to make them earn those hot dogs so we can get it. And last but not least, certainly not least, is a member of the safety committee, Lisa Fryer, who is a resident of Bayside with her family and young children. And Lisa's agreed to join the safety committee. I asked her this week, and I'm thrilled to have her and her voice as part of the committee.
Excellent. Michael, can you send me an updated list of who's on the safety committee, please?
I will, yeah.
Thank you.
I sent you that, and then it's just with Lisa's name. I'll send it to you again.
Okay. I hope I have those.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
And now we move to Jeffrey.
Sensitive of the fact that we've been going for almost 3 hours, I will try to make this brief. The Waterfront Safety Committee, as we mentioned last month, was going to look at the 2014 rules that were adopted by the overseers in 2014, make some minor modifications and one addition, and bring those modifications to the Board of Overseers this month. We have done that. You have in front of you the 4-page document that is titled Northport Village Corporation Waterfront Regulations. We made no changes to the first 2 pages, where it looks at things like fishing, swimming, miscellaneous vehicles, behavior. We believed as a committee that those things really are in the purview of the safety committee, not the waterfront safety committee as we've been charged. So we took a pass on the first 2 pages. The minor modifications we made were on the last 2 pages titled dinghy/float rules. We went to pains not to make broad material changes to this document because we're asking the overseers to ratify it. The changes we made were minor edits, removing some statements that really weren't rules, they were just statements, taking in sections where it talked about the boat float and saying boat floats because there are multiple floats, adding paddle boards because since 2014 we now all have paddle boards. So we've made those minor suggestions. One addition that we liked and is in this, in number 2 under the dinghy float rules, is to require that dinghies tied overnight to the boat float may not have engines exceeding 9.9 horsepower. And dinghies tied overnight to the outfloat may not have engines exceeding 25 horsepower. In our effort to define a dinghy, when we had our actual first meeting, there was quick consensus that a dinghy does not exceed 12 feet and 5.5 feet wide. And there was also quick consensus for the well-being of our infrastructure, it makes sense for dinghies overnighting on the wharf float to not exceed 9.9 horsepower and not exceed 25 horsepower on the outfloat.
So,
yes.
Oh, wait, I'd rather him finish his report before we take questions.
That's it. So what we would like from the overseers this morning is a ratification of this.
Jude?
so the previous rule defined, it said dinghies, but didn't essentially define them.
Well, no, it did define them. The 2014 document defined a dinghy as not to exceed 12 feet in length.
Okay.
We added 5.5 feet wide, and then we added the language around the horsepower.
Lee?
I like it.
Judy?
I move that we ratify the 2014 rules as clarified by these emendations.
Second.
Second by Lee. Discussion?
I like it. I think you've done a good job.
Well, it was a team, and part of the team's in the audience.
And I don't give out I don't give out compliments very often.
Not easily,
I was
yes.
gonna say, every game leave you.
Now Mike wants one.
Oh.
I will note that this is not the end of the waterfront safety's
Well,
challenges.
And I have something else after we adopt this.
We're at the front end of a process that may indeed go on for several years, but this is a great start. Thank you very much. Jeffrey?
So just call the question, and then I have something else.
I move the question.
Yes.
So we're ready to vote.
Ready?
She's
You
already
got your hand in
Yeah,
there?
I'm ready to vote.
Sometimes I don't know if you have something to say or if you're... Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? And Michael?
Excellent
Michael,
job.
you should know, by the way, Dick Brockway had to leave the meeting about 15 minutes ago.
So the next thing we'd like to discuss this morning, soon to be afternoon, is we need some guidance. So the Waterfront Safety Committee is proposing a pilot registration program for this summer. It will be voluntary. We will ask the owners of watercraft using village assets, the wharf dock, the outer float, and the north shore for storage, to register their watercraft. And we would like to do, you register, you fill out the form with your name, telephone number, etc. Sign the document saying that by registering your boat, you understand the rules and you accept the rules. And then you get a sticker to put on your boat. Ultimately, we would like a permitting process to be part of a formal ordinance that would be adopted possibly at the annual meeting this summer, but to allow us to pilot something this summer. We really like to pilot something this summer. So our question is, how do we do that? And do we need to look at the overseers to say, Waterfront Safety Committee, it is okay to pilot a voluntary program this summer?
We have the right to have those regulations.
Well, I think that Jeffrey's concern is that by adding a permit and then ultimately maybe a fee for the permit, and how you allocate a limited number of permits, you need an ordinance. And we don't have an ordinance right now.
But we could do the
But
regulations.
we can do the pilot program as the voluntary basis to do data gathering, so that we know how necessary it is, how interested people are in it, if it's making a difference if people read the rules versus pretend there's not rules. So I think what the cover that this really hardworking committee would love is a vote from us that says we authorize you to engage in this pilot program whereby you get to gather data about what is necessary to impose a user fee and a permit.
For this summer season.
For this summer season.
Put a timeline.
Yeah, right.
Mike?
I'd also add that part of this is, we've heard that people don't really know the rules and everything. As part of this, they would be signing off on understanding the rules.
Right.
And I think, for me personally, I'd love to see that what we do is we kind of change people's thought process a little bit from, I arrive in Bayside when the weather's nice, I dump my stuff, and then I use it when I want, and then I take it away when it starts to snow, okay? And instead we want people to think, if I'm not gonna be here for 4 weeks, we have way more kayaks than we did 10 years ago. If I can move it out of the way so other people can access theirs, if we can change those types of thoughts through this summer, then maybe what we actually come up with an ordinance can be looser and allow people the flexibility to just be smart about it.
I think it's an excellent example of getting buy-in from the community to the ultimate ordinance. I think it's a brilliant idea that you all came up with.
Okay.
So you would need a motion.
I need a motion.
I move that the waterfront committee be authorized to implement their pilot program for voluntary permits for the summer of 2018 in anticipation of presenting.
2019.
It said 18,
2019, in anticipation of further modification of the waterfront rules.
Second by Lee. Any further discussion?
I would just ask that once you cement your pilot program, you just present to us the steps that one has to go.
And we're going to work on that at our April meeting.
Right, just so we can support you when somebody says, hey, what do I do?
Yeah.
Okay.
No one talks that way.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Excellent.
That's unanimous. Anything else?
That's all I have for today.
Do we want to talk about the float?
No.
I do. I would like to just throw out there as a thought that we were talking about.
Next month.
There's not an action
Do we
item.
have, because I don't know that we have enough information. I think we're going to have questions that we can't answer.
Fair enough.
So more coming next month.
Excellent. And you'll
Stay
keep that
tuned.
very succinct, I'm sure. Town of Northport issues?
No, just the trash thing that's coming up, and the question is, are we going to have recyclables? Bill corrected me, or they changed it. I was under the impression that they were going to be opening contract bids tomorrow, but apparently it's going to be the 8th of April.
That usually means they don't have enough, which is probably nothing concerning. It's because that's the issue now. So.
But the garbage to garden for Belfast or for Northport, if anyone has that,
I do have some information, local information on that, and I would say that somewhere in there was that if they didn't come up with a recyclable thing, Belfast has offered to take our recyclables, correct?
Certain
So,
Certain things that.
certain things, but you never
Right.
do it yourself.
right, you'd have to do it yourself, it wouldn't be collected. So anyway, it's to be determined.
Thank you. This has been quite an interesting meeting. New and continuing business, I keep this personnel HR committee item on there, but we're not going to get to it right now. I will note that our next meeting schedule is now going to be April 28th at 9 a.m. And we will attempt to keep that meeting on the succinct side as much as possible because we're going to follow it by a lunch break and then a 2 o'clock workshop. I'll send out information to everybody in this, including to Dan, so he can change it on the website. And what else? What am I missing? Mike?
July 4th, the band thing.
Oh, right.
My wife has volunteered to try to get a band again. She's already talked to the other 3 committees. The overseers were paid 1/4, so I'd like to make a motion that we fund that again.
I move that we contribute to the cost of the annual band up to $300, 1/4 of the total cost.
Second it.
That sounds perfect.
Any discussion? All in favor? It's unanimous. Steve?
You've all seen the movie Groundhog Day?
Yeah.
I would strongly suggest you consider a position document on the salmon farm. You can hand out at the beginning of the meeting when somebody stands up and says, I've just come back to Bayside, I'm wondering what the overseers are doing with the salmon farm.
I'll
Because
put
we're
words
gonna
together.
spend 20 minutes to half an hour every meeting talking about the same topic if we don't do something.
Second.
Good point.
Very good idea. Judy, you'll,
I'll do a
Address
draft,
it.
I'll send it to everybody, but I'm particularly charging John and Vicki and Mike in responding because they have been particularly involved in that.
And that's good because then as things get updated, we can just change out a paragraph and then hand it out.
and I too quickly jumped over the note that we have comments by meeting attendees on agenda item.
Yeah.
Gordon?
Good meeting, tough stuff. We've been going through it ourselves in this new committee, and so I'll do the first one is the tree discussion got me thinking about. I'd like to suggest that the overseers, unless it's already in place.
Having a hard time hearing.
How do we have some nighttime cutting on private properties. Doesn't seem like that's appropriate to me. It went around my house most of the time last fall. I mean, 9, 10 o'clock at night, guys up in a bucket cutting trees. Which brings down, I guess, the whole idea of a noise, perhaps, and other things. Don't need an answer now. I just think that I'm surprised if I'm the only person here in the village that is bringing this up. And I believe this guy's probably moonlighting a little bit. He's probably his real job with another company, and he's been coming in and putting some money on the side, working at night with spotlights, and that's all good. But at 9 o'clock, it seems kind of silly.
No, I know, at least the ones I'm aware of are not. They're just so darn busy, they're using every opportunity. But it's not so much, I mean, what you're talking about again is noise in the village and what's appropriate to do work. It's just like construction guys, you know, you don't start before 7, whatever time, 8 or 9 on
Do
a
we have an
Sunday.
end time?
And
So
there's
there's-
an end time, so
There's
it's
2 things to be thinking about. Do we want to consider a separate noise ordinance, or as part of the zoning thinking, do we incorporate noise levels and timelines? Back in 2001, when we adopted the current ordinance, there was a section in there that nobody could work before 9 a.m. and nobody could work after 5, and boy, that was not a comfortable conversation.
Yeah, I just think it's something you guys need to
Be
talk
aware
about
of
at some point.
So
in time.
would it come under zoning? Because my only experience is several years ago, I had somebody coming for fall cleanup and they happened to come on Thanksgiving Day at like, at like, 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, which just really riled one of my neighbors, one of my more colorful neighbors. And so again, I don't.
Yeah, it doesn't need to come under zoning. It is often, noise is often addressed in a zoning ordinance. That was something that we had in our first draft in 2001, and it quickly came out
Mike?
because people didn't want.
This is a great example of that article that you talked about, because we could have a meeting this summer that talks about noise, and then decide in the fall, when things cool down again, we
It
want
gets
to.
dark earlier.
Right.
Yeah, so, I think that's, I'd like to get some more input from everybody. of, Do we really want to, before we start thinking about numbers, because then you have enforcement again, and what are we going to do about all that? And then you have emergencies. When is an emergency? When is it not an emergency?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Gordon, keep going.
And the second point is, all this discussion about money issues and so on and so forth, I'd just like to remind the overseers that this committee that Jeffrey has so humbly taken on after Mike volunteered, there may be some stuff that comes up that involves some money. I know we've already talked about ladders. I think it's going to be tough, perhaps down the road, if we have no money to work with, come out with recommendations as to, how the hell do we solve a problem if we don't have any money to work with? Again, food for thought unless, and it hasn't come up yet, but as Mike kind of alluded to, we have something on the table that might be pending, it might involve a little bit of money discussion. So it might be overseers to think about, we have a committee that's been tasked to do something, it'll get hot this summer, believe me, that horsepower thing will rile a few of our longtime people up. So we might be, I'm not speaking for the committee chair or anything, but we might be having to talk about some money matters, that's all.
Lee?
I think once you institute, and it won't be this year, but if it goes through the overseers meeting and we have a fee for the stickers, there's your money.
Yeah, that'll be next,
Well,
that's a whole year away.
And I do, we have some opportunities to address infrastructure. We don't really know what the cost of those opportunities are yet. So again, my preference is for the overseers not to spend too much time discussing it until we have more answers than we have questions. Gordon's point is well taken. One of the solutions to our issues on the waterfront, some of the solutions are going to involve spending money. And we're going to know it as we get into it. But one of the things we might think about as we look at the 2020 budget is, are there things that we ought to be building in for longer term solutions to the issues we're dealing with?
Well done.
Also,
I have my hand up.
Go ahead, Michael.
Just also would like to raise in that regard, you know, a consideration not by us, but by the yacht club. Because the yacht club looked at its own fee structure. It seems to me that that's, you know, part of this that would then be a natural.
Got it.
Yeah.
Lee?
Rockland has both a dinghy fee and a mooring fee and a boat fee. And I think probably you're going to be faced with doing all three if you want to control the number of
Baby
boats.
steps.
Yeah.
Baby steps.
But again, the notion is to try to proceed in a relatively slow fashion, so we're not blowing everyone's mind.
Yeah, and I think Jeff wants to put this off because we have been here 3+ hours and we don't have the answers yet.
I wanted to go back to his comment about trees as a source of noise, but that I just want to remind us that part of our tree ordinance is replacement, and since you've done so well on getting rid of our danger trees, I'd love to see some proposals as to the cost of trees next time you sit.
Oh, it won't be the next time you sit, because I'm actually looking at where we can get free trees. They might not be 20-foot trees, but yeah, so we're gonna look at that this year. So, and I think I did mention, I hope you heard, that if you have suggestions as to where to plant some of these trees, that would be great.
Any other questions or comments from the audience? Hearing none, move to adjourn.
Excellent job.
Excellent.
Thank you, Michael. Excellent work.